Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a winter so cold, so ruthless, and so unrelenting that you'll wonder how anyone with empty pockets and a leaky roof made it out alive. We're talking about the 1700s. The Little Ice Age is still flexing its icy fingers. Coal's expensive, and well, let's just say you're not exactly lounging in a manor with a crackling hearth. You're poor, probably dirty, most definitely cold, and let's face it, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not begging, just saying it helps the channel and keeps the historical chill flowing. Also, I want to know, where are you watching from and what time is it? Drop your city and time in the comments, so we can see who else is freezing their toes off vicariously tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the feeling of your breath turning into ice as it leaves your nostrils. Your eyelashes are crunchy. No, not figuratively, literally. There's frost on your face. You slept next to the hearth, but the fire went out hours ago because you burned your last splinter of wood. The room smells like wet wool, something vaguely rotten, and your own unwashed body. The blanket, thin enough to read through. There's a crust of ice around the window and a solid layer of shame in the air. It's January, sometime in the mid-1700s. The Thames might be frozen solid. Your city, or hamlet or shack tucked in some godforsaken forest, is buried under snow. There's no central heating, no puffer jackets, no double-glazed windows. You've got a roof that leaks cold wind like a bad joke, maybe a chimney that mostly just sucks warm air out of the room, and no insulation to speak of. Your walls are stone or rotted wood, and the floor is so cold it might as well be an extension of the sky. You're poor, like working poor or no work at all poor. Maybe you're a day labourer, or your husband is, if he hasn't died of pneumonia or fallen through a frozen river trying to fetch firewood. Your options are bleak. You get up only because lying still feels like an invitation to death. You stamp your feet and move your arms because movement equals warmth. Sort of. Your joints crack like frost-laced branches, and every breath scrapes your throat like a winter wind laced with knives. The first task of the day is simple, really. Don't freeze. But that's harder than it sounds. You slept fully clothed. You probably even slept in your shoes. There's no changing into anything fresh because you don't have anything fresh. The rags you wear double as your pajamas, workwear and funeral attire. Should that become necessary? And you'd better hope they're dry because wet clothes in this weather are basically an execution sentence. Outside the world is quiet. Not peaceful quiet. More like eerie, ominous quiet. Snow muffles everything, but you can still hear the occasional creak of a tree giving in to the weight of frost, or the distant cough of someone whose lungs have been giving out since last November. If you're in a city, there might be the shuffle of hooves and carts, poorly covered wheels squealing on ice. If you're rural, there's just the occasional crow and your own heartbeat thudding against your ears. Here's the real kicker. If you're in Northern Europe or parts of North America, winter isn't just cold, it's cold cold. The Little Ice Age, which started back in the 14th century, is still influencing weather patterns. Glaciers are advancing in some areas. Crop yields are unpredictable, summers are short and barely warm, winters long, dark, brutal. There's no guarantee spring will be any better. And remember this delicious little fact, you can't just go buy heat. Coal costs money, firewood is scarce. If you live near a forest, there might be laws against collecting it. That's right. In many places, forests are controlled by landowners or the crown. And taking wood, even dead branches, can get you fined, whipped, or tossed in jail. So while you're shivering in your bones, the idea of building a fire is not just a logistical challenge, it's a legal one. Quirky side note, some people did the unthinkable. If your boots had holes and your blankets were laughable, you might wake up and deliberately not try to warm up. Some folks believed that moving from freezing to warm too quickly could shock your system and kill you, so they'd pace themselves, letting their numb extremities thaw slowly. Whether that worked is up for debate, but hey, desperation makes scientists of us all. And speaking of debate, historians still argue about just how much the cold-shaped population shifts, work patterns, and political movements in this era. Did brutal winters push more people into cities in search of relief? Did they inspire revolts due to hunger and unrest? It's hard to pinpoint cause and effect when everything is so interconnected. Bad harvests, cold winters, poor infrastructure, economic collapse. It all swirls together like a snowstorm in a broken teacup. Back inside your frozen shelter, you do what you always do. Keep moving. If you have kids, you press them against your sides. Not out of love, well, maybe a little, but because shared body heat is the poor man's furnace. You might light a candle, but you'll hoard it. That tiny flicker isn't for warmth, it's for morale. Seeing something burn makes you feel like you're winning, even if just a little. Later, you'll try to scrape together something edible, maybe a crust of bread hard as roof slate. If you're lucky, there's some leftover gruel to warm over whatever pathetic flame you manage. But that's for later. Right now, it's about staying alive, that's all. No goals, no ambitions, just not dying. So as you shuffle to the door and prepare to brave the wind, remember this. The 1700s didn't care about your comfort. Nature didn't either. But somehow you, whoever you are, kept waking up and doing it all over again. Day after day. Freeze after freeze. Your clothes are your armour now, not against swords or bayonets or any of the other things history books usually care about. No, your enemy is silent, white, and all-consuming, the cold. So before you even think about heading out the door, you do the only thing that might mean the difference between making it to evening or being found stiff in a snowbank come morning. You start layering. Let's not pretend this is a fashion show. There's no closet to browse through, no boots lined up in neat little rows. What you have is a pile, and it's mostly damp. Maybe you've got a second pair of stockings, maybe not. They're patched and one is shorter than the other, but they're going on your legs whether they itch like madness or not. Next, another shirt if you're lucky, possibly your dead brother's or something you bartered for with a neighbour last spring. Doesn't matter. It smells weird, it's got buttons missing, but you shove it on. Now you start stuffing. Wool is scarce. Real wool anyway. But straw? Rags? Paper? If it fits in the gaps between your shirt and your waistcoat, it's going in. Maybe you tear an old petticoat into strips and wrap them around your arms like makeshift insulation. If it feels bulky, awkward, or like you've turned into a human scarecrow, then congratulations, you're doing it right. Underwear? Let's not even talk about it. Hygiene's a luxury when survival is on the line. You're focused on trapping every whisper of warmth against your skin like it's gold dust. You wrap your feet in scraps of cloth, hoping to avoid frostbite, or at least hide the blackened toes you're trying not to look at too closely. You tug gloves, or what used to be gloves, over your fingers. Holes? Absolutely. But you can mend them later, assuming your fingers are still attached by sundown. Outside, the cold bites instantly, chewing at every exposed inch of skin. It doesn't matter if the sun is up, its warmth is decorative at best. Your breath spills out in little white clouds as you trudge through the snow, each footstep a gamble. Too far from the road and you could sink waist-deep into a drift. Too close to it and you risk slipping on a patch of ice and splitting your head open. Either way, nobody's coming to help. Everyone's just as cold and miserable as you are. You pass a man wearing a patched-up greatcoat 2 sizes too small, tied shut with a rope. He gives you a nod. Maybe you know him, maybe not. But there's something like solidarity in the way you both don't say anything. What is there to say? Stay warm? Not happening. Hope you don't die? Redundant. Let's take a second to appreciate how absurdly resourceful people got. In some areas, women would take the stuffing out of old mattress, usually straw, maybe feathers if you were lucky, and sew that right into their skirts or bodices. People lined their sleeves with animal fur, even if it meant killing the family cat. Yes, the cat. In towns, the local paper wasn't just for reading, it was a layering material. Wrapping newspaper around your legs or stuffing it into your boots could provide just enough extra insulation to keep your skin from cracking open like old leather. And you've probably got 1 or 2 items you guard with your life. Maybe it's a heavy cloak inherited from a grandparent, or a wool shawl that smells like fire smoke and old soup but keeps your shoulders warm enough to matter. Losing it would be like losing a limb. In fact, plenty of people did lose limbs, just not from battle or disease, but from the simple crime of not having enough fabric. Now here's a historical fact you might not have expected. There were fashion rules, even for the poor. Sumptuary laws still clung to the edges of society in some regions. The idea was that certain materials or colours were only for certain classes. Like you in your poverty were supposed to know your place based on what you wore. Velvet? Off limits? Fur? Are you kidding? Even if you managed to scavenge a bit of fox pelt, wearing it could make you a target for suspicion or jealousy. So people found ways to make things look less expensive, Rough stitching dull dyes visible wear to avoid drawing attention. Quirky fact: in some colder villages, there was a tradition of sharing a community coat. No, really. Imagine one heavy, decently made wool garment that everyone took turns wearing when they had to go outdoors. The trick was timing. You needed to run your errand while someone else wasn't using the coat. It was like booking a slot in the warmest 15 minutes of your day. And yes, it smelled like everyone. Now here's where things get even weirder. You could be dressed like a human hay bale and still get colder after you went inside. Why? Because there's no real temperature regulation in your home. Most houses don't even have insulation. Once the fire goes out, the heat vanishes almost instantly. And worse, the inside of the house traps moisture. That moisture clings to your clothes and your skin. You sweat a little from the layers when you're moving, then freeze when you stop. So the same coat that protected you outside becomes a damp, chilling sponge indoors. And people didn't necessarily understand hypothermia the way we do now. There wasn't a neat word for it. Folks just said someone was struck with the cold or took ill after a frost. Sometimes they'd notice the sleepy Gasserundgish symptoms and think it was fatigue or bad humours, not realising their neighbour was drifting quietly toward death. By the time they figured it out, it was too late. There's some debate among historians over whether layering practices were widely known or just passed down through families. Was it trial and error? Regional tradition? The result of centuries of desperation? Some argue the science of warmth wasn't codified until much later, but clearly people were innovating with the few scraps they had. It's hard not to call it science when you're testing your theory by staying alive for another day. You go about your day wrapped in bulk, like a walking laundry line. You can't move fast, you can't bend easily, but you're warm enough. That's all anyone wants. Enough. Enough to make it to tomorrow. By evening, you're back inside, peeling layers off one at a time, checking for wetness, for damage, for lice. You hang things close to the fire if there is one, but not too close, unless you want them to ignite. You rub your hands together, cough once, and pull your knees to your chest. The cold never leaves. You just learn to live alongside it, like an unwanted roommate who's always breathing down your neck. And tomorrow, you'll do it all over again. Rag by rag, layer by layer, breath by freezing breath. Firewood is gold. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. It's actual life-saving currency in the frozen world you live in. And no, you don't have a tidy stack of logs drying neatly by the hearth. You have nothing. A few broken twigs, maybe a hunk of rotting wood pulled from the side of the road. Or you burned your stool last night. Yes, your only piece of furniture. Sacrificed to keep your fingers from going numb. Again. The truth is, in the 1700s, especially during the bitter grip of winter, finding fuel became an act of war. Every branch, every stick, every sliver of burnable material was something to be hunted, hoarded, and, if necessary, stolen. And that last bit, very common. People would risk their lives and their freedom just to bring home enough wood for a fire that might last a few hours. Firewood theft wasn't just frowned upon, it was criminal. In some places it carried harsh punishments, public shaming, fines you couldn't pay, or even imprisonment, and all for pocketing a couple of branches from the edge of a nobleman's estate. You might wonder, why not just take wood from the forest? That's where the trees live, right? But here's the thing, you don't own those trees. The land belongs to someone else, usually someone who doesn't even live near it. Rich landowners, the church, or the crown itself. In some places, deadwood was allowed to be collected by the poor. This was called Estover rights, but even that was inconsistently enforced. One day you could get away with dragging a half-rotten log back to your hovel. The next, a gamekeeper could chase you off or drag you to the local constable. So you get smart. You sneak out at dawn or dusk when the light is low and the air is cruelest, hoping no one sees you. You tie rags around your feet to muffle the crunch of snow. And when you spot a decent branch, you yank it and bolt like you've committed a murder. Because in the eyes of the law, you kind of have. And then there are the other fuel sources, if we can generously call them that. Dung, animal and human. Yep, it burns. Poorly, it stinks, but it burns. In rural areas, families would collect it into patties and dry them on stone walls or the sides of houses. Kids would handle this job, casually moulding little piles of manure into flat discs like they were making scones. Once dried, you'd toss them into the hearth. The smell, suffocating. But it gave off just enough heat to make it worth the nosehair singe. Then there's peat. If you lived in Ireland or parts of Scotland, peat bogs were your saviour. blocks of damp, ancient plant matter cut and dried for burning. It smoked a lot and burned slow, but it worked. In fact, entire economies ran on peat for a while, but harvesting it took time, tools, and strength. Not everyone had all three, and during winter, good luck slicing through the frozen peat with a dull shovel. In towns and cities, people got creative. Trash was fuel, broken furniture, shoe soles, old clothes, anything that might combust. Sometimes you'd burn things you needed more than heat. A wooden spoon, your broom handle, the baby's cradle. There was always a line between survival and self-destruction, and you were constantly dancing along it, trying not to fall in. Some even resorted to burning books, though, let's be honest, most of the poor couldn't read anyway. A Bible might survive longer than a newborn, simply because nobody dared toss scripture on the fire. But poetry? Gone. Philosophy? A warm 10 minutes tops. Here's a quirky tidbit. Chimney sweeps in some cities didn't just clean soot, they sold it. Why? Because soot, when compressed, could be mixed with other materials to make crude briquettes. Was it efficient? Not really. Was it disgusting? Absolutely, but it was better than freezing. There were even folks who scavenged burnt-out fires for leftover embers and ash that still held a whisper of warmth. You'd see them huddled near taverns and bakeries, sniffing out heat like rats. Now, let's pull back for a moment and talk about the bigger picture. Historians still debate whether the fuel crisis was a symptom of urban overpopulation, climate shifts, or poor forest management. Probably all of the above. The Little Ice Age meant colder temperatures, which meant more people needed more fire for longer periods. Forests, already stripped for naval ships and construction, couldn't keep up. Cities grew faster than infrastructure. And the poor? They were last in line for everything. So the fuel shortage wasn't just a nuisance, it was structural violence, baked right into the economy. You probably hear stories, whispers really, about a friend of a friend who froze to death because their fire went out in the night. Or worse, about someone who died because their chimney collapsed, or they burned something too toxic like old paint or tar. There's a dark irony here. Fire, the very thing that keeps you alive, is also one of the greatest dangers in your home. Especially when your chimney is a cracked pile of bricks and your roof is flammable thatch. One stray ember and you're not cold anymore, because you're ashes. Even lighting the fire is a struggle. Matches don't exist yet. You're using flint and steel, maybe a bit of charcloth if you're fancy. It takes time and skill. Some households kept embers going 24/7 just to avoid restarting the fire from scratch. A pot of coals might be buried in ash to stay alive overnight, so it could be blown back to life at dawn. If that failed, you'd beg a neighbour to give you a light, maybe carrying a chunk of glowing coal back in a tin box, or wrapped in a cabbage leaf. Seriously, once you get a fire going, it becomes the centre of your world. Not for beauty, not for ambience, for function. You dry your socks over it, you boil your food on it, you huddle around it, you cry in front of it, and if you're really desperate, you might even open the oven door, if you own such a luxury, and sit right inside the fireplace to soak up every precious calorie of heat before it dissipates into the night. It's wild, isn't it? That something as simple as fire, which today we can summon with the flick of a switch, was once a daily battle, fought with numb fingers, to scavenge scraps and this constant gnawing threat of death. Tomorrow you'll go looking again, for sticks, for dung, for trash, whatever burns, because you have no choice. Sleep is a gamble in the winter. You're not lying down to rest, you're lying down to negotiate with the cold, trying to trick it into letting you wake up. And unless you've somehow managed to land yourself in a house with a bed to your name, which would make you suspiciously lucky for this story, you're sleeping on a floor, a straw mattress, or a wooden bench. No springs, no padding, just a thin barrier between your chilled bones and the colder ground. And here's the thing, your body doesn't produce enough heat on its own to survive the night. Not in these temperatures, not in the 1700s. So you do what everyone else does. You share, not out of comfort, not out of kindness, but because your body is a tiny furnace, and if you pile up enough tiny furnaces together under the same threadbare blanket, you might just make it till dawn. This means you're sleeping in the same bed as your siblings, your cousins, your elderly grandfather who wheezes like a broken bellows, and sometimes a baby who isn't even yours. It's not weird, it's not optional, it's survival. The more bodies in the bed, the better. Not that you get to stretch out. Nope. Everyone lies in a row side by side like firewood stacked for burning. If one person turns, the others turn. If one coughs, it sets off a chain reaction of hacking. But at least you're warm. Warmish. Some families sleep in shifts too. If you only have one decent blanket and 6 people, you rotate who gets to be under it. Half sleep while the other half move around or sit by the fire to keep the coals going. It's a sad little choreography of exhaustion and strategy. And if the fire goes out in the middle of the night, someone, usually the youngest or least favourite, is sent out to fetch more fuel. Or they rip up part of the floorboard, or burn a shoe. Here's a deeply uncomfortable but very real historical fact. Sleeping naked with others wasn't uncommon. Hear me out. Clothes were often stiff, wet, or infested with lice, especially in winter. Sleeping without them, skin to skin, meant better warmth transfer. It wasn't about anything scandalous. It was physics, human radiators, pressed together like lumps of meat trying not to freeze. If that makes your modern brain squirm, welcome to the 18th century. And no, there's no privacy, your room is not your own. Most cottages are single-room spaces. Maybe there's a loft, maybe not. If you're lucky, there's a thin cloth separating the bed area from the rest of the room. But mostly everything happens in the same space. Sleeping, cooking, crying, dying. So yeah, you'll hear your parents arguing or doing things you'd rather not think about. You'll smell your uncle's feet. Someone will snore directly into your ear all night. But again, it's better than being dead. Weirdly enough, some communities even had formal sleeping arrangements, like warming partners, usually arranged among travellers or those staying in poor houses. You show up, you're assigned a cot and a stranger, and you both just deal with it. Bodies didn't matter. Personal boundaries were a summer luxury. In winter, flesh meant warmth, and warmth meant life. That's the equation. You've probably heard of warming pans too. In richer households, servants would heat metal pans filled with embers and swish them between the sheets before the family climbed in. You, of course, do not have this. If anything, you might try the poor man's version, wrapping a hot rock or brick in rags and slipping it under the covers. It works, for about 20 minutes, before turning cold and vaguely dangerous. There are more than a few cases of people burning themselves or setting their bedding on fire this way. But hey, what's a third-degree burn compared to frostbite? And speaking of beds, some were shared vertically. Yeah, people would lie top to tail, head to feet, feet to head. It was practical. Warmer, less awkward eye contact, and better use of space. Of course, this meant smelling other people's breath and feet in equal measure. But at this point your nose is mostly numb, so you don't even notice anymore. But even with all the layers and all the snuggles, winter nights are treacherous. It's not unusual to wake up and find someone has died in their sleep. Quietly, slowly, without anyone noticing until morning. Their body didn't shiver enough, or they got too cold to wake up. Maybe it was the baby next to you who stopped moving sometime in the night, or the old man with the failing lungs, or your sister whose skin feels like marble when you accidentally brush her arm in the dark. And what do? Nothing. There's nothing to do. You can't move the body until morning, and besides, the warmth still helps. You lie there, you pretend not to notice, you sleep anyway. Here's where it gets interesting. Scholars still debate how common this kind of communal sleeping really was. Some argue it was universal among the poor. Others believe it varied more depending on local customs, household size, and space. Diaries from the time mention bed sharing frequently, but not always as a matter of survival. It was just normal. Still, in the dead of winter, the choice was clear: bundle up with your family like a litter of puppies, or risk waking up frozen stiff. And if you didn't have a family, you found someone, maybe a neighbour, maybe a stranger. Widows might take in orphans, labourers might bunk together in barns, in workhouses you were assigned a bedmate whether you liked it or not. Your body became part of a communal heating system, and for that night at least you weren't alone. When the morning comes, if it comes, you're stiff, your joints ache. There's a layer of ice on the inside of the window. Someone's blanket is frozen to the wall, and you sit up slowly, carefully, checking your fingers and toes for colour, for movement, for pain, because pain is good. Pain means feeling, and feeling means you're still alive. Someone coughs, someone else stirs, someone groans and mutters a prayer, and the first words out of your mouth aren't good morning, they're, "Did the fire go out?" Because it always comes back to the fire. Your hands shake as you hold the cup, but not from weakness. Not entirely. It's the sheer thrill of something warm between your palms. You can't feel your fingers most mornings, so even this cheap scalding brew feels like a miracle. You take a sip. It burns your tongue and you don't even care, because in the 1700s, this right here, this filthy little mug of warmed up rot gut, this is your central heating system. You're drinking to survive, Alcohol isn't luxury, it's life support. The poor in winter turn to it like moths to fire. You know why? Because it gives you that rush. That first sip sends a fake warmth blooming through your chest. It lies to you, whispers that everything's fine, that your limbs aren't stiff, that your breath isn't fogging the air like smoke from a dying chimney. And for a few minutes you believe it, the drink of choice, usually the cheaper swill money can't quite afford. Small beer, gin, rum if you're near a port, maybe even something homemade in a pot no one washes. In England, gin's everywhere, especially in the cities. Clear, bitter, brutal. You can get it for pennies. It's called Mother's Ruin, but winter doesn't discriminate. Everyone ruins themselves equally. In parts of Eastern Europe, it's vodka. In the Scottish Highlands, whiskey. The exact name doesn't matter. What matters is that it burns on the way down and numbs everything on the way back up. Some folks even make their own if they've got access to barley, potatoes, or anything vaguely fermentable. Not legal, of course, but legality's a summer concern. Winter is when you break the rules, because cold doesn't follow laws either. The drink might be cloudy, might have a bug floating in it, might taste like feet, but it's warm and it kicks, and that's what counts. Here's the catch though, it doesn't actually keep you warm. Not really. That glow you feel? That's blood rushing to the surface of your skin away from your core, where you actually need it. Alcohol tricks your body, speeds up heat loss, and makes frostbite more likely. But the thing is, when your teeth are chattering and your joints are locking up, a temporary lie feels better than a long, slow truth. So you keep drinking. And sometimes it's not just a comfort, it's your breakfast. With no food and no fuel, liquor becomes your morning ritual. You start the day with a shot to get your blood moving. You head out into the snow half drunk, half dreaming, thinking maybe today will be the day you find something, firewood, food, coin, anything. Alcohol makes it all seem just a little less impossible. In some places, inns and taverns will let you warm yourself by the fire if you buy a drink. So people scrape together what they can to nurse one cup for hours, just to sit in the glow of someone else's hearth. That's how taverns become winter sanctuaries for the poor, not for the drink necessarily, but for the heat, for the bodies crammed together, for the stale, smoky air that means you won't freeze to death alone. There's even this strange little winter hack. People used to soak cloth in alcohol, wrap it around their feet, and then stick their boots back on. Why? Because it felt warm at first. Never mind the trench foot, the infections, the long-term consequences. Winter makes you do weird things, desperate things, anything to stop the ache in your toes or the numbness creeping up your calves like slow, invisible fire. A quirky footnote in history. In 18th century Russia, there were local edicts banning the sale of alcohol to people who appeared too cold or intoxicated, because they kept freezing to death on the way home. Some tavern owners got fined if a customer died in the snow outside their door. The logic? If you got someone too drunk to walk and they curled up in a drift and died, that was your fault. Not that it stopped anyone. In Moscow, people still drank in alleys, shared bottles with strangers, and passed out under bridges with icicles forming in their hair. And for women, alcohol was a strange contradiction. Society frowned on public drunkenness. Unless you were poor, then it was expected, necessary even, especially if you were a mother trying to quiet hungry children with nothing but boiling water and a crust of bread. A bit of gin could take the edge off. Some even gave it to their babies. Yes, babies, to calm them. Gin and honey, rum and milk. Not exactly doctor recommended, but then again, doctors cost money and didn't come to your part of town. Of course, not everyone approved. Churches railed against drunkenness in winter. Pamphlets and sermons warned that alcohol was the devil's trap, a sin, a spiral. But none of those people were sleeping with icicles forming inside their windows. None of them had to choose between freezing sober and warming up with something that might eventually kill them. Easy to judge when your fiat aren't rotting off. Historians still argue about the actual impact alcohol had on survival rates. Some say it made things worse, more deaths, more accidents, more frostbite. Others argue that for the poor it was one of the few tools available. A coping mechanism, yes, but also a kind of communal ritual. Shared bottles meant shared warmth, shared songs, shared misery. Because alcohol didn't just warm your body, it loosened tongues. You'd sit by the fire, if you were lucky enough to find one, and suddenly someone would start singing. A folk song, a work chant, a crude little rhyme passed down through generations. Someone else would clap, then stomp, then sing along. Before long it became something almost human, almost joyful, even if the snow was piling up outside and the walls were shaking with wind. And that that little moment of escape, that was the real warmth. Not the gin, not the fire, but the illusion that for just a few minutes everything was fine, that you'd survive the night, that laughter and song could melt even the deepest frostium. When the bottle runs dry, you go home, or somewhere that pretends to be home. Maybe you wobble through the alleys, maybe you fall, maybe someone helps you up, or maybe they don't, because everyone's tired, everyone's cold, and sometimes you just don't wake up the next day. But until that moment comes, you lift the cup again, let the burn hit your throat, let the lie wrap around your bones, and you whisper to yourself, just a little longer. The pot on the hearth is barely bubbling. You stare at it like it owes you something. It's not soup, really, not even close. It's hot water with a hint of something edible, if you squint. A potato skin, a scrap of onion, maybe a lump of suet the size of a fingertip, if someone was feeling generous. The steam curls into the air, carrying the ghost of flavour, but your stomach knows better. It gurgles in protest, already anticipating disappointment. This is what dinner looks like in winter when you're poor in the 1700s. Actually, no, this is what every meal looks like, if you're lucky enough to have one. It's called soup, stew, gruel, or pottage, depending on where you live and what you pretend is in it. But really, it's all the same. Warmed up weakness in a bowl, a half-hearted promise of calories. You don't eat to enjoy, you eat to keep from falling over in the snow. The process is a ritual. You save every peel, every bone, every stale crust of bread. You soak it, boil it, reboil it, reuse it until the broth turns grey and smells like dishwater. It's not about taste, it's about warmth. Heat in your belly, even if it's barely food at all. And then there's stone soup, not just a folk tale. It's a real thing in some places. If you're down to nothing, you drop a clean stone in the pot and pretend. Maybe you scrape it with a bit of garlic to fool your nose. The stone becomes a placeholder for the feast you don't have. The smell of boiling water tricks your brain. It gives you something to gather around. It gives your children hope, even if you're all just sipping salted lies. Bread is a delicacy. Most days, you don't have enough flour to make real loaves, so you make flatbreads with sawdust, mashed beans, or chestnut flour if you're near a forest. The worst part? It doesn't even taste bad anymore. You've forgotten what food's supposed to be. Your body craves hot, thick, dense. You want something that sits heavy in your gut like a rock and lasts until morning. But that's a fantasy. The reality is a wooden spoon scraping the bottom of an empty pot while the wind howls outside like it's laughing at you. When the crops failed, and they failed often during the Little Ice Age, you got creative. People boiled roots they couldn't identify. They cooked nettles, tree bark, even old leather. Yes, leather. Boil it long enough, they said, and it softens. You chew it until your jaw aches and your teeth wobble. But hey, it's something. There are records of people grinding up bones into powder and mixing it with water to make a sort of broth. Doesn't sound good? It wasn't. But it kept you from dying, maybe. In towns you might get lucky. Bakeries sometimes handed out scorched crusts or the heel of a loaf at the end of the day. That meant standing in line with 20 others, hoping there was still something left when it got to you. In some places, charity soup kitchens popped up, usually run by churches, but they were overwhelmed, underfunded, and not particularly generous. You got a ladle of thin broth and a side of judgment. "Why don't you work?" they asked, as if working created warmth. Here's a weird little fact. Snow was sometimes used in cooking, not for flavour or texture, but to make meals last longer. People would bury perishable scraps in snowdrifts, using nature's freezer. In some places, they even packed snow into their porridge to make it go further. Yes, you watered down hot food with ice. Desperate times, colder measures. Sometimes neighbours shared. Emphasis on sometimes. If someone had trapped a rabbit or stolen a chicken, they might bring it home and make stew, and if you were lucky enough to live nearby, or if you were related, you might get a ladleful, but more often people hoarded. Winter made everyone selfish, bitter. Sharing meant less for your own, and when your children were crying from hunger, generosity felt like a luxury you couldn't afford. You eat slowly, not out of politeness, but because there's not enough to eat quickly. Every spoonful is measured, savoured. You scrape the sides of the bowl with your finger, then lick your finger. You chew the soggy potato peel twice as long as it needs. You wonder if licking the spoon clean counts as a second course. Someone always asks for more, even though there is no more. You look at them like, really? Then you look away. Here's the heartbreaking part. Kids got used to it. They stopped crying from hunger eventually. They knew what it meant when you said, maybe tomorrow. The worst sound wasn't the wind or the wolves or the creaking of a collapsing roof. It was silence at the dinner table, a silence so heavy it felt like another mouth waiting to be fed. Theories abound among scholars about the nutritional intake of the rural poor during harsh winters. Some believe people entered a kind of semi-starvation hibernation, slower movements, longer sleep, less energy spent. Others argue that people were so malnourished by March that even small illnesses became fatal. There's no agreement, really, just scattered data, death records, and desperate journal entries. But what everyone agrees on, winters thinned the population. Hunger did the killing. Cold just helped. Sometimes you got lucky. A neighbour slaughtered a pig and shared the offal. You don't ask what part you're eating, you just chew. Or a noble's kitchen throws out scraps and you bribe the scullery boy with a copper coin. You bring home a lump of congealed fat and melt it into the pot like it's treasure. For a few nights, the soup tastes like something. Greasy, rich, almost sinful. You sleep warmer with a full belly, or at least less empty. And sometimes, just sometimes, there's celebration. Candlemas, 12th night, or even just the relief of a thaw. Someone brews a communal pot. People bring what they have, turnips, dried herbs, a carrot, maybe even a sliver of pork. It's still thin, still sad, but it tastes like togetherness. That's the real ingredient. A whisper of human warmth in a bowl full of barley. You fall asleep that night with a stomach not quite full, but not empty either. It's a win. You curl up near the fire, the taste of broth still clinging to your teeth, and you pretend you're not hungry. Pretend you're full. Pretend, just for a while, that you're not starving in the cold, eating boiled roots and lies. You step into the cellar and immediately regret it. The air down here is a different kind of cold, wet, still, ancient. It smells like mildew, old potatoes and earth that never properly thaws. But it's your best option, maybe your only option. Because your home, if you can even call it that, is one icy draught away from being a snow globe with a broken roof, and the cellar at least has walls thick enough to hold off the worst of the wind. You've given up on comfort long ago. At this point you're chasing less miserable. And down here in this low-ceilinged pocket of stone and dirt you find it. Barely. The frost doesn't bite quite as hard, the wind doesn't howl in your ears, and there's no snow, unless it blows in through the busted trapdoor above. You light a candle and set it in a saucer of grease. The tiny flame wobbles. You watch the smoke curl up to the damp ceiling and feel something like relief. This is survival architecture for the poor. Burrow down, go low, and hide from the sky. Basements, cellars, storage pits, these weren't just for pickles and turnips. They were winter bunkers. If your house was built into a hill, you were lucky. The earth around you held on to what little heat there was. The deeper you went, the more stable the temperature stayed. It wouldn't be warm, not really, but it wouldn't be lethal. You could live in this cold, maybe even sleep. Not everyone had a cellar. In the countryside, some people dug holes, literal holes, in the ground and covered them with branches and sod. They'd crawl inside, curl up like animals and wait out the night. Sometimes it was a root cellar converted into sleeping quarters. Other times, it was just a trench, a depression in the dirt hidden beneath a tarp or a collapsed shed. In cities, you might know someone with access to an undercroft or a foundation-level space. You would pay them in food or firewood to sleep there, or you'd just sneak in and hope no one noticed. Some of the worst off, the outcasts, the beggars, the abandoned, found shelter in graveyards. Not metaphorically. They'd find tombs, mausoleums, even fresh graves still mounded with loose soil, and dig it into the edges. The dead weren't using the space after all. The warmth of the earth, however faint, was worth the horror. There are stories of gravediggers discovering entire families huddled in half-dug burial plots, their breath rising in the mist like ghosts. It sounds gothic now, but back then it was just another form of housing. You're lucky enough to have stone walls, though they sweat in the cold. Water trickles down them when the outside temperature shifts, creating puddles on the floor that never fully freeze but never quite dry either. You sit on a piece of cloth, wool if you're blessed, old burlap if not, and wrap yourself in every layer you own. You breathe through your mouth to keep your nose from freezing shut. You eat slowly, something small, and tuck the rest under your shirt to keep it from turning solid by morning. There's no real light, so you sleep in strange patterns. A few hours here, an hour there. You wake disoriented, not sure if it's midnight or noon. Your dreams are thin, feverish, full of food that vanishes the moment you bite into it. You hear things, mice scrabbling in the walls, water dripping, wind whistling through cracks you never found in daylight. Sometimes you imagine footsteps upstairs, other times you hope they're real. Here's a historical curiosity. In some parts of northern Europe, people used earth lodges, semi-subterranean homes built partially underground with thick sod roofs. They weren't for the poor necessarily, but the concept was sound. Let the ground insulate you. The deeper you go, the warmer it gets. By the time winter rolled around, those living in half-buried homes were significantly better off than anyone above ground. Which might explain why, during brutal winters, the idea of going underground stopped being symbolic and started being literal. You might have a straw mattress down here. Straw doesn't keep heat so much as it creates a barrier between you and the icy ground. But even that's a luxury. Often it's just a pile of old clothing or a sack stuffed with leaves. It gets damp, it smells, but it's better than stone. You arrange it into a nest and curl in, knees to chest, arms folded, fingers tucked deep into your sleeves. Moisture is your enemy. Too much and it seeps into your bones. But paradoxically, the cold dries things out, your lips crack, your skin flakes. The inside of your nose scabs over from breathing frigid air day after day. Your fingertips split, little painful fissures that sting every time you touch something. The cellar protects you, but it doesn't heal you. There's a debate among historians about whether poor families preferred to stay in their cellars during winter or use them as last resorts. It likely varied. In crowded cities like London or Paris, subterranean spaces became overcrowded. Dozens of families would cram into the same underlevel room, paying pennies for a spot in the damp dark. Illnesses spread quickly, but it was warmer than the streets, just barely. If you're alone down here, the quiet gets to you. You talk to yourself, or hum. You count drips of water. You invent stories to pass the time, usually ones that end in food or sunshine or magic. If you're not alone, the space becomes communal in the most uncomfortable way. Too close, too noisy, too full of breath and body. But at least someone can watch the candle while you sleep. Theft is still a thing, even down here. Sometimes, just sometimes, the cellar is a place of weird comfort. There's something about being underground that makes you feel hidden. Safe, even. The weight of the world, literally, above your head. The wind can't reach you. The snow can't find you. Down here, in the belly of your miserable little home, you feel like the cold has to knock before it gets in. And if you don't answer, maybe it'll leave you alone. Maybe. You hear the creak of the trapdoor above. Someone's coming down. A relative. A friend. A stranger looking for shelter. You sigh, shift your weight, and move over. There's no room, but you make room. That's how it works. No one has space, but everyone finds a corner. You blow out the candle. Darkness, silence, just the rhythm of breath and the occasional shift of a body against stone. You close your eyes and count. Not sheep. Just hours until morning. You wake up and something feels off. Not just the usual bone-deep ache or the tightness in your joints from curling into yourself like a dried-up leaf. It's your fingers. You can't feel them. Not in the, oh, they're cold way, but in the, are they still attached to me way. You look down, the tips are pale, waxy, and disturbingly still. You shake your hand and a dull throb responds. Not pain, not yet. That comes later. This is frostbite, or the start of it anyway. In the 1700s, you don't know the term, you just know your skin shouldn't look like this. The cold has started to kill the top layers of tissue, and if you're not careful, if you're not lucky, those fingers will blacken, swell, and eventually rot right off. It happens all the time to chimney sweeps, washerwomen, shepherds, beggars, especially children. They go numb and then it's over. Fingers, toes, ears, even noses lost to the frost like unpaid debts. So what do? You run your hands under lukewarm water? No, of course not. That's not a thing. Instead, you rely on what you think might help. Folk remedies passed down by desperate people. Some say to rub the frostbitten skin with snow. Others swear by animal fat, lamb's grease specifically. Rub it in until the colour comes back. If you're a little more daring, you might warm a pin in the fire and prick the skin to let the bad blood out. The pain means it's working, right? Some people, God help them, try bloodletting. Because naturally, if your fingers are freezing, the solution must be to remove blood from somewhere else entirely. That's 18th century logic for you. If the humours are out of balance, drain them. It's like trying to fix a leaky roof by smashing a window. And don't think doctors are swooping in to save the day. First of all, you can't afford a doctor. And second, medicine in the 1700s is a roulette wheel with missing spokes. There are no antibiotics, no sterile tools, no trauma care. You're more likely to get dosed with mercury or have a limb sawed off in the kitchen than to be treated. For the poor, home remedies aren't quaint. They're all you've got. You've probably got your own special brew passed down through your family. A salve made of pig lard, ash, and something that smells like old pennies. You rub it on your fingers and wrap them in a cloth that once served as a napkin, a bandage, and a winter hat. It might work, or not. Mostly you just wait and see. If the feeling comes back, good. If it doesn't, well, you've got 9 more. A fringe remedy floating around certain parts of Eastern Europe involved soaking frostbitten limbs in urine. Yes, your own if you had to. The logic? It's warm and sterile. 2 things you're currently lacking. You don't want to do it, obviously, but by your 3rd winter of losing skin to the frost, dignity is just another thing you traded away for warmth. Then there's chilblains, less dramatic than frostbite, but still awful. Your skin gets red, itchy, and swollen from constant cold and poor circulation. You scratch until it bleeds, and then it gets infected. Lovely. Soap is rare. Bandages are old linen if you have them. Your treatment is to sit closer to the fire and hope you don't make it worse by moving too fast or too little. There's no win here, just different flavours of loss. Open sores are common, especially on feet. You're walking all day in wet shoes, or worse, no shoes, and the skin just gives up. Blisters pop. The cold keeps them from healing. You can't stop walking though, because you need to gather wood, beg for food, or fetch water. So you wrap your feet in whatever rags you can find, stuff your boots with straw and carry on. Eventually the pain dulls, or you just get used to it, which is scarier. Some rural communities rely on cunning folk, herbalists, midwives, grizzled old women, who know more about healing than the men in powdered wigs with their leeches and Latin. They make poultices from comfrey, foxglove, or mouldy bread. Yes, sometimes mould helped. Turns out penicillin was hiding in your sandwich the whole time. But even they can't undo what the cold does. Once a toe starts turning black, it's only going in one direction, off. And let's not forget about the joints, the stiffness that creeps in and never really leaves. You're in your 30s maybe, but you feel twice that. Your knees crack when you stand, your hips grind like rusted hinges. The cold settles in your bones like a squatter who knows you can't evict him. Rheumatism is the word you hear whispered by old folks, but it's not just them. Even young workers complain about aches. The chill gets into your marrow and stays there, long after spring finally shows up. Children suffer worst of all. Their circulation isn't strong, their bodies aren't big enough to hold heat, and they're often barefoot because their shoes wore out in October. You wrap their feet in scraps of cloth, stuff them into makeshift boots, maybe old leather, maybe stitched together wool, but it's never enough. A kid who spends even one night outside without shelter might wake up missing toes, or not wake up at all. Still, life goes on. You learn to live around the damage, missing fingers, learn to grip things differently, limping from a dead toe, move slower. You watch your neighbours do the same, you swap stories, who lost what part of themselves and how. It becomes oddly normal, like comparing scars. Fell asleep drunk in a hayloft, lost an ear. Got caught out chopping wood in the snow, 2 toes gone. Historians still argue about the full extent of cold-related injuries among the poor. The records are spotty, the deaths often misattributed to vague illness or exposure. But anyone reading between the lines can see it. People weren't just dying from the cold, they were decaying in it, slowly, painfully, and often in full view of the people around them who could do nothing but watch. Back in your own body, you start to feel a dull ache return to your fingers. A good sign. You breathe on them, cradle them under your armpits, rub them until the skin burns. Not because it helps, but because it makes you feel like you're doing something. And sometimes that's all survival is. Trying something. Even when you know it probably won't be enough. Tomorrow maybe you'll try lamb fat again. Maybe you'll find someone with actual bandages. Maybe the sun will stay out longer and the thaw will start. But not today. Today, you live with the damage. And thank the frost gods that you still have a hand at all. The fire's burned down again, and that means it's time to send the kids out. Not for fun, not for play, for fuel. There are your tiny rag-wrapped scavengers, your pint-sized lumberjacks, your little heat fetchers in the war against winter. You wake them up while it's still dark, and their groans sound more like the creak of old floorboards than anything childlike. They're used to this. Bone-tired mornings, frost-laced breath, and the familiar sting of cold air slicing through the holes in their sleeves. They don't ask questions, there's no point. They know the drill: wrap your feet in cloth, tie your coat shut with twine, cover your ears with anything that resembles fabric. And then, out the door into the morning like barely dressed soldiers being marched off to the front lines. Because let's be honest, that's what it is. You're sending them to war. Not with muskets, but with brittle fingers and frostbitten toes, against an enemy that never sleeps and doesn't care if you're 6 or 60. You tell them to stay close, to watch for tree limbs, for broken fence posts, for bits of coal that maybe fell from a passing cart. They nod. They lie. The older ones sneak farther than they should, into places where the forest starts to look like private land, or worse, crown land. Places where a child caught with firewood is treated like a thief because they are thieves. Technically, but morally, please, no one stealing twigs to stay alive is evil, just cold. There are kids who don't come back. They go missing, swallowed by the forest, or they fall into snowdrifts and can't get out. Sometimes they're found, sometimes they're not. People whisper about it, especially during the coldest stretches of winter. Children who freeze in silence, children who sleep in ditches and never wake. But you can't think about that right now. You need the wood. You need the fire. And children right now are your fire gatherers. You might send them to the city streets depending on where you live. In London, for instance. Kids rummage through alleys and behind taverns, collecting kindling from broken crates, rotten furniture, even discarded brooms. One sharp-eyed boy can bring back enough to warm the hearth for an hour or two. Just enough to heat the gruel. Just enough to stave off another case of frostbite. If they're lucky, they find coal chips, leftovers from a rich man's delivery, spilled in the street and forgotten. Gold dust in this world. One handful of coal could mean warmth for an evening. And here's the thing, no one likes sending children out in the cold. But there's no such thing as a childhood winter break when your roof leaks and your walls sweat frost. Kids are workers, helpers, and sometimes the only ones small enough to sneak into places adults can't go. Under fences, behind manor walls, into the scrublands where fallen branches lie waiting like half-buried treasure. You might make a sled, just a rough board with some rope, to help them drag back the haul. Or, if that's too fancy, a sack. If they're strong enough to carry it, they can bring it. Doesn't matter what it is. Sticks, straw, pieces of cloth, old paper, dried dung, everything burns eventually. Everything has a heat value. It's not about the smell. It's about survival. Some kids work in groups, especially in larger towns. You'll see them moving like little gangs, all rags and habby knees, darting from corner to corner. They trade tips. That chimney's throwing out warm ash. Check the base for leftovers. That butcher sometimes tosses bones. That widow near the bridge has a soft heart and a hot pan. It's not organised crime, it's organised survival. Quirky fact? In some areas, kids would actually pretend to be chimney sweeps just to get access to rooftops where soot and half-burned coals collected. They'd tie rags around their faces and crawl into places that would kill an adult. Not that real chimney sweeps had it better. Those kids, yes, kids, often died in the flues or came out coughing soot for the rest of their lives, but at least they were warm while they worked, sort of. There's another layer here, the guilt. You feel it every time you watch them go, every time they come back with red cheeks and scraped hands, and you say, good job, like they just passed an exam instead of dodging death by exposure. You feel it when they ask for more bread and you say there isn't any, when they shiver by the fire they found, and you try not to cry because the grown-ups are supposed to hold it together. Historians still debate how early children started working in pre-industrial Europe. Some say 4 or 5, others argue it was more like 6 or 7. But when it came to winter survival, age didn't matter. If you could walk and carry a stick, you were useful, and usefulness was the only way to earn your place by the fire. Sometimes you make it a game. You tell the littlest one to pretend they're on treasure hunt. Whoever finds the biggest stick wins a song. Or you promise them a story if they bring back enough kindling to cook the soup. It's not much, but it keeps them moving. Kids don't understand the stakes the way you do. They don't need to. They just need to run fast, stay close, and come home with full arms. And when they come back, they stomp the snow off their feet and drop their treasures by the hearth like heroes returning from war. You sort through it. Some of it's wet, some too green, but enough of it will burn. You give them the warmest seat, a sip of something hot, a corner of your blanket. You rub their hands and try to get the colour back in their cheeks. You joke, you smile, you act like it's all fine, because they did their part. And now, for another few hours, the fire will burn. The sun goes down early, again. By 4 in the afternoon, the light outside has already begun to dim, and by 5 it's gone entirely, swallowed up by a sky the colour of bruised slate. That's when the cold creeps in hardest. Not all at once, like a wave, but gradually, with a patience that feels personal. It seeps into the cracks in the walls, slinks across the floorboards, and settles on your skin like a second unwanted coat. Night has come, and with it the most dangerous hours of the day. Because the truth is, the cold doesn't kill you in broad daylight. It waits. It waits until your fire has gone out, your body's stopped moving, and your eyes have closed. You never even feel it, they say. That's the worst part. You just get drowsy, your heartbeat slows, you drift, like falling asleep under a warm blanket, but the blanket is made of ice and you never wake up. You've heard the stories. Everyone has. The man who dozed off in the outhouse and never came back. The baby who froze beside his mother, both of them still curled together like nothing happened. The woman who left the fire to fetch water and never made it back inside. Some say she was still standing upright when they found her, hands stiff around the pail, eyes wide open, snow clinging to her lashes like she was just thinking. You don't tell these stories to scare the children, but they overhear anyway. Everyone does. Fear is part of the night routine. You feel it in the way people double-check the shutters, stuff rags under the door, and stack anything burnable near the hearth. Even the way you lay down feels cautious, angled, close to the fire, wrapped as tightly as possible, like you're trying to hide from death beneath a quilt that barely covers your feet. The fire is your last defense, a dying one at that. You ration the wood. One log now, maybe another in an hour. Or maybe not. Maybe you let it go out and hope the warmth lingers. You press your hands near the embers. Not on them, though you know people who've done exactly that, fallen asleep too close and woken up with blisters, or didn't wake up at all. Here's the nightly ritual, the last hot drink, even if it's just warmed up broth or watered down ale. The final check on the children. Pull the blanket up to their chins, tuck their hands under their arms, whisper, "Don't kick the covers off." Then you curl up yourself, every part of you trying to become smaller, tighter, warmer. It's not sleep, it's waiting. In many homes, someone stays awake to watch the fire. Not out of tradition, but necessity. Usually the one with the strongest will or the lightest sleep. You stare into the flames like they hold secrets, your face bathed in a heat that never reaches your feet. You count the wood left in the pile. It's not enough. It's never enough. And when the fire does die, when the last flame gasps and fades, you feel it. Immediately, the air shifts, the silence gets sharper, the darkness presses in harder. You lie there, fully dressed, huddled under everything you own, and still the chill slices through like a blade. Your body tenses without meaning to. Muscles cramp from constant shivering. Breathing becomes this shallow, cautious thing, as if exhaling too hard might let the cold inside. Sleep is broken and strange. You drift in and out, caught between fever dreams and half-conscious thoughts. You dream of warmth, not the sun, but smaller things. A hot stone in your pocket, a full fire grate, a thick wool cloak lined with fur you'll never touch. Sometimes you dream of places that don't exist. Houses without drafts, beds with feather mattresses, mornings where you don't wake up afraid, and then come the sounds. The creak of wood contracting in the cold, the sharp ping of ice cracking outside. The wind moaning down the chimney like it's trying to find you. If you live in the countryside, maybe you hear the distant howl of wolves. If you're in the city, it's rats skittering across the floor in search of crumbs. Every sound is magnified in the dark, and none of them are comforting. If someone in the household gets up to use the chamber pot to stoke the embers, they do it quietly, carefully, wrapped in silence like another blanket. You hear the soft clink of iron, the exhale of breath near a flint, maybe the hiss of a spark finding something dry. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and then you just listen to them sit down again, disappointed, colder than before. The elderly don't fare well on these nights. You know it. Everyone does. Their bodies are slower to heat up, slower to recover. You check on them in the morning, carefully. You watch for movement, for breath. If there's none, there's no ceremony. Just silence, and the slow, bitter acceptance that another body's gone cold permanently. You don't scream, you don't weep. You just move them to the side and tell the others to stay bundled. There will be time to dig later. Some workhouses developed protocols, wake-up checks during the coldest hours, someone walking from bed to bed, lightly shaking shoulders, making sure everyone was still alive. If they weren't, the body was left till morning, stiff and quiet, like a warning. That's what the cold does. It erases people, turns them into shapes under blankets, names on a list to be crossed off when the sun comes back. And yet here you are, alive. For now, You're up before dawn, breath fogging in the faint light, feeling your limbs one by one. The fire's gone, the coals are dead, but you're not. That's something. You stretch your legs slowly. You whisper to the others. A child stirs, an old man groans. The silence breaks piece by piece. There's no celebration, just movement. You get up, you restart the fire. You boil water. You warm your hands and your face first. Everything else can wait. You made it through another night. Barely. The streets don't look like streets anymore. They're quieter, narrower, pressed in by snowbanks as high as your shoulders. Every alley is an icy corridor. Cobblestones are buried beneath layers of frozen slush. And in some places, the ground has iced over so thick you can't tell where the road ends and the gutter begins. But you walk anyway, slowly, carefully, your steps short and deliberate, because slipping could mean a broken hip, or worse, a broken hip and no one to help you. The city in winter feels like it's holding its breath. Everything's slower, quieter. The noise of daily life, hoofbeats, shouting, laughter, is muffled under a thick frozen hush. Smoke rises from chimneys in spindly grey tendrils, and the air smells like soot and damp wool and the faint metallic scent of ice. But here's the detail that stays with you, the one that's burned into the back of your throat. It smells like death, too. You've seen the bodies. Everyone has. They don't always get noticed right away. Someone collapses under a bridge in an alleyway has seen against a wall where they thought they could just sit for a moment and rest. And they never get up. By morning their clothes are stiff, their limbs locked at strange angles. Their faces are grey or blue or pale white. Sometimes their eyes are open, sometimes they're frozen shut. And most of the time no one moves them right away, because where do you put a frozen body? There are no morgues, not for the poor, not really. No ambulances rolling up, no white sheets. You just deal with it. Or, more often, don't. You walk around the body. You glance, you move on. Someone might throw a blanket over them. Someone else might whisper a quick prayer. But for the most part, the dead wait in the streets for the city to remember them. And in winter, the city forgets fast. Gravediggers work slower when the ground is frozen. Too hard to dig. They set up fires over the earth to thaw it before they start, but even that takes hours. If too many people die too quickly, there's nowhere to put them. In the worst weeks of winter, bodies get near and stacked. In back rooms, in churches, in wagons. There are records of people being buried in mass graves once the thaw came, not out of cruelty but practicality. The cold makes you efficient and numb. Sometimes people don't even realise someone's dead right away. A person curled up in a doorway could be sleeping, could be resting, could be gone. You don't want to be the one to check. You don't want that on your hands, so you walk past pretending not to notice the stillness, the frost creeping across their clothes, the way they don't flinch when the wind cuts in. And then there's the other thing you don't talk about. How close you came last night. How you felt your body go slack. How you didn't wake up when someone stirred beside you. How your dreams got fuzzy around the edges and warmer than they should have. That's how it starts. Your body tricks you into thinking you're safe. That's what kills so many. They feel warm right before they die. Like a cruel final mercy. Some families can't bring the dead outside right away. The ground's too hard, the roads are too treacherous. So they stay indoors with the body, in a bed, wrapped in cloth, covered in snow if the roof leaks enough. It's not morbid, it's just how things work. The cold preserves, the body can sit for days without rotting. You keep living around it until someone can come with a cart and take it away. Here's a grim little truth. In some communities there were unofficial body collectors. Not government workers, just desperate people with sleds or carts who charged a few coins to haul corpses to the churchyard. They weren't doctors. They weren't priests. They didn't ask questions. They showed up, loaded the body, and vanished. Sometimes they even scavenged from the dead. Rings, shoes, spare fabric, whatever wasn't nailed down. In some cities, bell ringers were tasked with tolling for the dead in winter. But they couldn't keep up. The tolls became meaningless. So many in a single week, they blurred together. People stopped listening. Death didn't ring out as tragedy. It was just another part of the season, like sleet or dirty snow or frost on the inside of your window. One scholarly debate still swirls around how many winter deaths were actually recorded. Official tallies often underestimated the toll. Cause of death exposure shows up in parish records, but how many froze in silence without anyone knowing? How many died anonymously, dragged from doorways and dumped without ceremony? The statistics don't always capture what people saw with their own eyes. The slow vanishing of neighbours, the stiff limbs poking out from snowbanks, the child lying too still in the corner. You keep walking, you pass the church. Its doors are shut. Maybe they're full, maybe they're locked, maybe the priest is sick, or gone, or inside by the fire pretending not to hear the knocking. Churches in winter are strange things, sometimes home sanctuaries, sometimes tombs, depends on the hour. Eventually, you reach the market square. It's mostly empty. A few stalls are still up, covered in tarp, their owners shivering behind crates of wrinkled vegetables. You see the butcher, his hands raw and pink, chopping something frozen. You smell the fat in the air and feel hunger twist in your stomach. A small group huddles near a brazier someone dragged out into the square. No one talks. They just lean in, silent, sharing the heat, pretending the bodies in the alleys aren't part of the landscape. You head home the long way. You don't want to pass the bridge again. That's where they found that boy last week. Barefoot, eyes open, clutching something in his hand. People said it was a crust of bread. Probably a lie. But you don't want to see the spot. You don't want to remember. Back at your door, you knock the ice off your boots, what's left of them, and push inside. The warmth hits you. Barely. Just a whisper of heat from the hearth. The kids look up. You nod. You made it. You're home. You light a candle, not because you need it, but because it feels alive. The night is coming again. You know what waits out there. You've seen it, stepped around it, and tomorrow you'll do it all again, because that's winter. That's life. And death is just what happens when the fire finally runs out. You've reached the edge. Not the edge of town, though it might feel like that, but the edge of what you can reasonably endure. You've burned the last scrap of wood, stripped the last patch of straw from the mattress, boiled the same bones 3 times over. Your fingers are raw. Your stomach feels like an echo chamber. And when you look around your room, if you can call this cramped, crumbling space a room, you start to see the truth you've been avoiding for weeks. You can't survive here much longer, which means it's time to face the unthinkable, the workhouse. Just the word makes your insides twist. You've spent your whole life avoiding that place. It's the thing people whisper about, like it's cursed. If we don't get through this winter, we'll end up in the workhouse. Don't complain or you'll end up there. She had to take the baby to the workhouse, poor thing. It's not just a building, it's a threat, a last resort, a surrender. But it's also warm. Well, warm enough. You weigh the options, stay here and possibly die, or go there and live like something less than human. It's not even a real choice, is it? So you gather your things, not much, just what you can carry without freezing on the walk, and you make the journey, one heavy footstep after another, through snow that crunches like brittle paper. Bring the kids, of course. You have to. You won't leave them behind to freeze or starve. The workhouse looms ahead, ugly and grey, and squatting on the horizon, like it's daring you to come closer. You step inside and the cold clings to your coat like it doesn't want to let go. The clerk barely looks up. He asks your name, your age, the names of your children. He doesn't ask if you want to be here. No one wants to be here. Then comes the worst part. Separation. Men to one side, women to another. Children divided by age and gender. You try to protest, but your voice cracks, and the clerk doesn't even blink. It's policy, order, discipline. There's no space for affection or sentiment in the workhouse, no time for family. This is a machine and you're just another cog to be processed. They strip you of your clothes as ragged and filthy as they are, and issue you a uniform, shapeless, rough, dehumanizing. You look like everyone else now, which is the point. Uniformity is control. You're not supposed to feel like yourself in here. You're supposed to forget that you had a self. Then you're led to your bed. A straw mattress on a wooden frame shoved against a wall stained with old moisture and older despair. It's still better than what you had at home. That's the sting of it. This place is grim, sterile, cold in its own way. But it's also structured. Predictable. You'll get a meal, a bed, heat. Not much, but enough. You'll survive. And for many, that's all the workhouse is, survival with the edges filed off. Here's a historical tidbit that stings more than it should. Some people chose the workhouse over the street not just out of desperation, but out of strategy. If you were elderly or ill, it was safer. If you were pregnant, it guaranteed some form of food and warmth. It wasn't kind, it wasn't merciful, but it was functional. And when you've run out of rope, even a prison can feel like a rescue. But make no mistake, it is a prison, just without bars. You're given chores, hard ones, laundry, stone breaking, picking oakum, that is, unravelling old rope fibres with your bleeding fingers, scrubbing floors until your knees ache. You're expected to work regardless of your age or health. And if you refuse, punishment. If you complain, punishment. If you try to steal extra food, punishment again. Speaking of food, it's exactly what you'd expect: bland, repetitive, and barely edible. Gruel, bread, maybe a bit of cheese or boiled cabbage if you're lucky. Everything portioned with military precision. No seconds, no kindnessness. It's not designed to nourish, it's designed to keep you upright. At night the rooms are quiet, but not peaceful. You hear coughing, crying, shifting bodies, people who can't sleep, people who are afraid to. There's always someone who whispers to themselves in the dark, rehearsing regrets like a lullaby. The air smells of damp wool and human failure. It clings to you, even in dreams. The children have it worse in some ways. Separated from their families, made to live under strict regimes, taught to behave more like inmates than kids. There's discipline in everything: how they stand, how they eat, how they speak. Play is rare, joy even rarer. You see your daughter across the yard one day and aren't allowed to speak to her. Not unless it's a designated visitation hour, and only then under supervision. Quirky but true, some poor actually faked destitution to get into workhouses during the coldest months, only to try escaping once the thaw came. They knew how miserable it was, but they also knew it was warm. That warmth could mean one more season alive. There's also an ongoing scholarly debate about the intention behind workhouses. Were they meant to help the poor or punish them? Historian A says it was charity with conditions. Historian B says it was social control designed to keep the underclass quiet and grateful. The truth is probably both. A system that kept people alive, but made sure they hated every second of it. Weeks pass, or maybe months. You lose track. The days blur together like snowflakes in a storm. Eventually your hands get used to the work. Your back stops aching, mostly. You learn the schedules, the rules, the tone of voice that gets you through the day. You see your kids less, but they're eating. They're alive. And when the snow starts to melt and the streets return to mud and stink and slush, the talk begins. Will you leave? You don't know yet. The world outside hasn't become safer, just less frozen, but the workhouse has stripped something from you. Your dignity, your choices, your voice. You want it back, even if it means going hungry again. One morning you see someone leave. Just walk out. Their name gets crossed off a list. No one says goodbye. You think, maybe next week. You think just a little more warmth. You think maybe. The wind is still howling outside and your breath fogs the inside of the window where frost has traced its delicate, deadly lace. But tonight, you've got a little plan. Not enough wood, not enough food, but maybe, you can outsmart the cold just a bit. Because when the world freezes and everything hurts, the only weapon you have left is your own ingenuity. So you rummage through your things, what few things you've got, and start making your winter armor from scratch. You start with the oldest trick, layers. Not just clothes on clothes, but anything you can sew, wrap, stuff, or tape to your body. You take an old shirt and start lining the inside with straw, not the soft kind, but the scratchy, dusty, itchy kind you stole from a stable. It crinkles when you move. Like you're wearing a haystack, you don't care. The air between layers traps heat, and you'll take every trapped calorie of warmth you can get. Then you take your breeches, already full of holes, and stitch a lining inside from torn up newspaper. Not that you can read the paper, but that's not what it's for. It's insulation, newsprint, wool scraps, dead leaves if you're desperate. Any of it can help. Some folks sew cloth into pockets they fill with moss, or dirt, or shredded cloth. The idea is bulk equals warmth. You don't need to move fast in winter. You just need to not die. You wrap your feet in rags soaked in grease, not elegant, and they smell like last week's stew, but they help keep the wet out and some heat in. Then you tuck your feet into makeshift liners, layers of sackcloth or paper if you have it, and stuff that into your ruined shoes. If you don't have shoes, you fashion soles out of rope, bark or leather, taken from something else's former life. You tie it all together with strips of cloth until your feet look like you're trying to smuggle roast chickens out of a butcher's shop. Your hands, rags again. Or, if you're feeling clever, you turn the sleeves of an old shirt into mittens. The key is coverage. Doesn't matter if you can't grip well. You're not doing fine needlework in a blizzard. You're trying to avoid frostbite when you go to the outhouse or hunt for kindling. Some nights you sleep with your clothes still wet from snow or sweat because taking them off means losing all your hard-earned heat. You curl into yourself like a scared animal, your body a furnace fueled by gruel and regret. And when it's really bad, when the wind sounds like it's clawing at the walls and the window rattles like it's going to explode, you stuff rags into every crack you can find. You push straw under the door, you pin fabric to the windows, you wear a hat to bed, maybe even two. Heat escapes through the head, they say, so you pile on hats like you're dressing for a comedy sketch no one's ever going to laugh at. And here's where things get a little weird. People start inventing rules for how to stay warm, not just physical ones, but magical ones. Always sleep with your boots under your pillow. Turn your coat inside out on even-numbered nights. Never whistle past the hearth. It invites the cold in. You don't believe half of it, but you do it anyway. Because rituals feel like control and control feels like hope. A quirky little detail in some colder villages, people would line their walls with manure, not just as insulation, but as a kind of plaster. Once dried, it created a surprisingly effective seal against wind. It smelled, of course it did, but so did everything else, and it worked. So when you hear that your neighbour smeared pig dung around the base of their cottage to keep the drafts out, you don't mock them. You take notes. There's also the hearth chair, if you're lucky enough to have a carpenter in the area. These high-backed wooden chairs curved around the sitter and trapped heat from the fire like a personal sauna. If you weren't lucky, you made your own version, a bench with a blanket strung over it, forming a crude cocoon. Kids would crawl under it, pretending it was a fort. Adults would lie there because it was the warmest spot in the house. Even beds got de-makeovers. You stuff the mattress with whatever you've got, straw, leaves, feathers, cloth scraps. You line the underside with sheep dung or clay to keep cold from rising through the floor. You pile blankets on top, then quilts, then coats, then sacks, then your own body heat. And if someone farts under there, so be it. Gas is warmth, and shame doesn't exist in sub-zero conditions. Scholars still debate how widespread these kinds of insulation hacks really were. Some argue the poorest simply didn't have the resources. Others point to oral histories and surviving garments that show intense improvisation. What's certain is that ingenuity was often the only difference between surviving the night and being another name in the parish death register come morning. The cold forces creativity. You see a broken door and think firewood. You see a hole in the roof and think free snow for water. You see a ruined dress and think mittens. No one looks fashionable. No one's trying to. If your coat makes you look like a walking pile of curtains, congratulations, you're doing it right. You get compliments for absurd things. That's a nice double-layer sock glove setup you've got. Is that goat hair lining in your bonnet? Fancy. And even the rich in their heated drawing rooms start to copy the poor's ingenuity, minus the smell, of course. They adopt bed curtains, foot warmers, hot stones in pans, but you know who figured it out first. You did. With rags, dung, paper, and the sheer stubbornness to stay warm in a world that keeps trying to freeze you solid. When you lie down at night, you can barely bend. Your layers press against you like armour. You can't feel half your limbs, but you're still here. Still wrapped, stuffed, and pinned into one more makeshift winter strategy. Somewhere outside, the wind screams, the walls creak, but inside your ridiculous, mismatched insulation fortress, you think, you hope, you've got a chance at sleep. And if the cold finds a way through, you'll patch the hole tomorrow. With more rags, more straw, more anything. You're a poor person in winter. You're not warm, but you're clever. And clever might be enough. You wrap your hands in something that used to be a flour sack. The print's still faintly visible. Wheat sheaves. Now stained with soot and grease, the fabric roughened from years of desperate repurposing. It's not ideal. But then again, nothing is. You tie the corners with twine and flex your fingers, feeling the edges fray against your skin. Congratulations. You've just made mittens, sort of. If you're lucky, they'll last a week. Gloves were a luxury for the poor in the 1700s, especially during winter. Real leather gloves? That's aristocrat gear. Maybe a craftsman had a pair if he hadn't already sold them to buy bread. The rest of the population got by with whatever they could stitch together. Fingers weren't meant to be bare in a wind that could crack stone, but unless you got creative, that's exactly how they ended up. Raw, purple, stiff with cold. So you learned to innovate. Let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer absurdity of what people wore to keep their hands from falling off. Meat bags. Seriously. If you lived near a butcher and had the right timing, you could ask for or steal the leftover stomach lining from a pig or sheep. Rinse it out, let it dry until it was flexible but not brittle, and voila, instant waterproof mitts. They smelled horrific. They made your hands sweat and slip, but they were better than nothing. Sometimes people used old boots, cut the toes off, pull the remaining upper over their hands, and tie them at the wrist. Imagine walking around with two mismatched leather bags on your hands, like you're about to perform some awful puppet show. But you wouldn't be laughing. You'd be able to grip a fire poker, or a broom, or a bucket without freezing your fingers off. That's all that mattered. Then there were the truly desperate solutions, dead animal parts. If you trapped a rabbit or found a discarded carcass, you could skin it and fashion makeshift mittens from the fur. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't always safe. If the skin wasn't properly cured, it could rot, stiffen, or fall apart in the middle of a storm. But that soft lining of fur against your frozen fingers felt like magic the first time you tried it. Warmth, real warmth, straight from something that had been alive just days before. One lesser-known trick, wrapping your hands in old dried cabbage leaves. Sounds ridiculous, but they mould to your fingers, and when sandwiched between cloth or leather, they act like a primitive insulation layer. You might smell like stew, but again, warmth. Dignity takes a back seat when you're trying to stop your fingernails from turning black. Let's not forget flour sack gloves. Not just for hands either. Those sturdy cotton bags were cut up and used for everything: foot wraps, headscarves, infant diapers. But for gloves, they were perfect. Thick enough to stitch, soft enough to fold, and they usually had been washed so many times that the fabric held together even when wet. You'd double layer them, maybe line them with wool if you had scraps, and sew little pockets into the palms to stuff in warm stones or embers wrapped in cloth. Of course that was a gamble. One ember too hot and your hand became a human baked potato. Still, plenty of people did it. The trick was knowing just how hot to get the stone and wrapping it in enough fabric to keep the heat in without searing your skin. And you couldn't hold it too long. It had to be a temporary blast of warmth passed hand to hand like a secret. You might have seen people walking with their hands tucked into a cloth tied around their waist, like an apron folded backward. That wasn't laziness, it was survival. Keeping your hands in a warm pocket close to your core helped stave off frostbite. And if you had to work, say sweep a floor or chop wood, you'd switch hands in and out like a one-person rotation system. One hand works, the other warms, and repeat. Historical records don't say much about gloves for the poor, not because they didn't exist, but because nobody bothered to document the everyday genius of survival. We know more about powdered wigs than we do about how the lower classes kept their fingers attached. But if you look at painting, letters, and some of the more detailed inventories of the period, you see clues. Cloth mittens, patched. Hand wraps, woolen 2-pair, leather fragments for gloves, tiny footnotes in the ledger of suffering. Quirky fact, in parts of Scandinavia, reindeer fat was used to coat hands before layering cloth or hide on top. It acted like a barrier, repelling water, trapping warmth, and bonus, softening the skin. That is, if you could stand the smell, which most poor people could, because when the air constantly reeks of smoke, dung, and unwashed humanity, a bit of reindeer grease doesn't register. There's also the communal solution. In houses where multiple families lived together, or even just a large, sprawling kin group, there were often shared gloves. Yep, one pair passed from person to person for chores that required going outside. You needed to go to the well, wear the gloves, coming back in, strip them off, hand them to the next frozen soul. Hygiene? Not even in the top 10 list of concerns. If someone had lice or scabies, well, you were all going to find out eventually anyway. And of course, kids didn't always get gloves. If you were the youngest or just unlucky, you went barehanded. Maybe your mother tied socks over your hands. Maybe she didn't. You learned quickly to keep your fingers tucked under your arms, to ball your hands into fists, to shove them into pockets with little stones you'd warmed by the fire. And if you cried, someone might yell, "It'll toughen you up," as if frostbite builds character. Historians sometimes romanticize this kind of resilience, like it was quaint or admirable. But if you asked someone at the time, they'd trade every last scrap of hand-sewn burlap for a real pair of lined leather gloves, the kind that kept your fingers pink instead of purple, the kind that didn't collapse into a pile of damp cloth after 2 days in the snow. Still, you make do. You always do. You tie another layer around your wrist. You flex your hands, feel the stiffness, the little stabs of returning circulation. You blow into your fists. It's not much, but it's yours, your own little invention, your own armour. And tomorrow, if these fall apart, you'll make new ones. From flour sacks, from fur, from whatever hasn't burned yet. Because the cold doesn't care how silly you look, but neither do you. You've got hands to save. The thing that really drives it home, that you're freezing, forgotten, and fighting for every scrap of heat, is when you glance out the window, and there they are, the rich, gliding by in carriages, bundled in furs so thick they look like they're being swallowed whole by animals that died of comfort. Their cheeks are pink, but not from frostbite, from brandy, from good food, from fires that never go out. And you, on the other side of that frosted glass, watch them the way a starving man watches a feast. Their boots shine in winter. Meanwhile, you're wearing shoes that have been mended so many times they look like puzzles made of damp leather and regret. They step out of those carriages and into houses glowing with heat like they've got miniature suns locked in their fireplaces. You can smell the wood smoke, actual fragrant wood. Not dung, not peat, not scrap rope soaked in fish oil. Wood, oak maybe, cherry if they're fancy, and they are fancy. Inside their drawing rooms, it's a different season altogether. There's no ice on their walls, no frost clinging to their bedposts. They've got thick curtains, double windows, insulated shutters. Their walls are lined with tapestries that trap warmth, not just hang there looking pretty. And near the hearth, cushioned chairs with high backs to block drafts. Maybe a maid kneeling to stir the fire, adding in another log like it's nothing, because to them it is nothing. You hear stories. Servants roasting chestnuts by the fire while the family laughs over cards. Footmen with heated bricks in their boots, gentlewomen resting their feet on cast iron warmers, boxes filled with coals tucked under petticoats to keep the chill off their toes. They have hot water bottles, ceramic ones, wrapped in cloth, slid under the covers by someone who isn't them. They go to bed with warm feet. You go to bed with half-numb legs and a prayer that your toes will still be there in the morning. The gap between their lives and yours isn't just wide, it's a chasm. You can hear warmth, smell it, sometimes even see it glowing through their windows, but you can't touch it. You imagine what it's like to be one of them, to wake up in a feather bed under layers of wool and fur, to eat porridge cooked over a steady flame served on real plates, to stretch, yawn, sip warm tea and ask, "Is it cold outside?" As if it matters. But here's the part that really stings. They know you're freezing. They see you. You're the servant polishing their boots with cracked hands. You're the laundress dipping rags into icy water while your own clothes hang in stiff lines. You're the stable boy sleeping near the animals just to stay alive. And yet they treat their dogs better than you. Those dogs get blankets, food, a dry place to sleep. You get a job if you're lucky, and maybe a few coins. Ever hear of the crinoline firewall? That was something upper class ladies did, layering their massive skirts so wide that they could sit near the fire without their feet ever touching the cold. It was fashion, but it was also insulation. Meanwhile, your skirts are patched from 5 different garments, and you've learned to sit sideways by the hearth so you can warm one foot at a time, switching every few minutes like you're turning meat on a spit. The elite even invented games around warmth. Cards played near the fire, charades to get the blood pumping. Parlor Stücke dances designed to keep bodies moving just enough to stay toasty. They made warmth fun. You make warmth possible. You make it by working their stables, tending their fires, scrubbing their sheets. And then you go home, empty-handed, to a house where you can't afford what you just spent your day providing. Quirky fact? Some rich households had indoor sunrooms, glass-walled spaces designed to trap what little winter sunlight there was and make it feel like spring. They'd lounge there, sipping warm wine, soaking in the golden glow. It didn't work for long, sunlight was weak and fleeting, but it was a novelty, a distraction. Meanwhile, your house hasn't seen actual sunlight in weeks, because the windows are too thick with frost, and you're too busy stuffing rags into the holes in the wall. Of course, not all the rich are evil. Some toss coins into the poor box at church. Some donate coal or blankets during brutal winters. Some even sponsor soup kitchens, but that's charity, not justice. It's temporary warmth, handed out like grace, not because they have to, but because they can. And when it runs out, you freeze. Again, they go back to their banquets. You go back to your boiled turnips. Historians love to point out their contrast. The grand homes of the 18th century, they say, were architectural marvels. But even they had cold spots, drafty halls, chilly corridors. So what did the rich do? They redesigned. They built smaller rooms for winter. They added doors to block cold air. They used rugs thick enough to smother the echo of your own footsteps. Every problem was solved with money. You have to solve it with your bare hands. Sometimes it's too much to look at. You turn away from the manor windows. You duck your head when carriages roll past. You pretend not to see the steam rising from their teacups or the way their cheeks glow from actual warmth, not the bite of cold wind. But part of you does see it. Part of you remembers, not out of jealousy, out of survival. because knowing what they have helps you reimagine what you need, what you deserve, what you might one day fight for, if not for yourself, then for the child curled beside you in rags, dreaming of mittens and full bellies. You go back inside, hands numb, jaw clenched. You stir the fire, one ember flickers, just enough to warm your face, not your feet, not your future, but it's something. And as the snow begins to fall again, you think about their world, the one where fires never die and feet never freeze, and you wonder how long you can keep pretending that your world isn't broken. The bucket's frozen again. You knew it the moment your fingers touched the handle, solid, rigid, unmoving, like a forgotten gravestone of summer. You chip it away at the ice inside with a rusted spoon, because that's all you've got, and the irony is so sharp it almost makes you laugh. Surrounded by snow, water everywhere, and yet somehow you can't get a drop to drink. Fetching water in the winter is its own small epic. If you've got a well nearby, that's the obvious solution. But the well might be frozen too, surface iced over, the pulley rope stiff as bone. You go anyway. You go with a bucket wrapped in cloth, hands wrapped in more cloth, hope wrapped in desperation. It's not a long walk, but in weather like this, even for 50 paces feels like a pilgrimage. You brace yourself before touching the rope. One tug, then another. If you're lucky, the pulley doesn't snap. If you're really lucky, the rope isn't frozen inside the well, leaving your bucket bobbing uselessly just below the surface like a cruel joke. Sometimes you bring a hot stone to drop in first, to crack the surface and melt a path. Other times you have to lower an axe, or whatever you can call an axe these days, into the shaft to break the crust manually. You lean over, breath fogging up in great plumes, hands shaking as you work. No gloves, can't work with gloves, fingers red and blistered. You chip away, hoping the cold doesn't take another nail this time. If you don't have a well, it's worse. You walk to the river, or where the river was. Now it's just a ribbon of ice cutting through the landscape, as if someone spilled milk and forgot to clean it up. You know the good spots, the ones where the ice is thin and the current is still strong beneath. You kneel on the edge with your bucket in one hand and your life in the other, because one wrong move and you're under. Gone. There are stories. You've heard them. A boy gone through the ice, a woman who vanished in a moment of fog and brittle cracking. They say the current carries you under, turns you into a frozen ghost beneath the surface. That image clings to you as you break the ice, dip the bucket, and watch it fill, slow, trembling, one slosh at a time. Then there's the snow itself. So much of it, mountains of it. You start melting it when you've got no other choice. Fill a pot, set it over the fire, or what counts as fire, and wait. The smell isn't clean. It's earthy, mixed with smoke and whatever dirt the wind has blown in. And it takes forever. Snow's a liar that way. It looks like abundance. It looks generous. But melt it down and you get a pathetic trickle of lukewarm water. Barely enough to cook with, let alone drink or wash. Washing, by the way, is practically a fantasy. In summer, maybe you had a tub, a pond, a pail of water and enough privacy to scrape the grime from your body. In winter, no such luck. You wipe yourself down with a cloth dipped in half-frozen water and pretend it counts. You skip your armpits. You skip everything, really. Because the second your skin's wet, you're colder. Wet means freezing. Freezing means dead. So you stink. Everyone stinks. You don't talk about it. You just exist in a haze of sweat, smoke and unwashed wool. Toilet? That's an adventure. If you've got a chamber pot, count yourself lucky. Otherwise, you're going outside. You pick your moment carefully. Windless, maybe, or at least not howling. You crouch, shiver, and move fast. The seat, if you have one, is ice cold. Your thighs burn from contact. The relief is physical, yes, but so is the fear. One slip, one moment of clumsiness, and you could be on the ground. You could be stuck. The outhouse becomes a death trap for you. You've heard of people freezing there. A cruel punchline. He died with his pants down. Except nobody's laughing. Sometimes in cities you find communal pumps, not reliable, often frozen. The handle squeaks, resists, and then nothing. Maybe someone's already been by and cracked it open. Maybe not. You try anyway, hand wrapped in cloth so you don't freeze to the iron. There's a moment of resistance, then a sudden gush, a brief victory. You scramble to catch it in a tin cup, a bowl, your hands. You guard it like gold. Here's a quirky detail. People used to store water in wooden barrels to keep it from freezing. The wood had just enough give to allow for expansion, but you don't have a barrel, you've got a bucket. maybe 2. You keep them wrapped in old blankets at night. You tuck them near the fire like children, and when they still freeze, you break the ice with whatever blunt object hasn't already been burned. And let's not forget the paradox. Too much water outside, not enough inside. Snow piles up until the roof creaks. Gutters break. Icicles form long enough to stab a man through the chest. You have to clear them, but careful so. Knock them down with a broom wrapped in cloth. Don't stand too close. They fall like knives. Some historians argue that water access was the single most underappreciated danger of winter in early modern life. Not just the cold, but the sheer inconvenience, the distance, the time, and the weight of it. Carrying water in buckets through snow, uphill, barefoot or near colle every day just to live. It breaks your back and your spirit. And you do it again and again because thirst doesn't wait for spring. When you finally get the water home, you guard it. It's not a resource, it's treasure. You ration it for cooking, maybe washing a dish or two, maybe wiping down a wound if someone's sick. No one drinks freely, no one pours it out. Every drop counts. You've learned to drink from your cupped hands, slow mehij atu, like you're in a desert instead of the middle of a snowstorm. Tonight, you melt snow in a pot again. The kids watch it bubble. You ladle it out, warm but thin. They sip it like soup. No complaints, just gratitude. That's winter. You stop asking for flavour. You start thanking the steam. Outside the ice groans. Somewhere water flows beneath it. Invisible. Alive. Untouchable. You stare at your hands. They're cracked, red, wet from the snow, stiff from the cold. And you think, not for the first time, how did something so simple become so impossible? Then you pour another pot, because tomorrow you'll need it again. The fire's finally caught. You're sitting cross-legged on the floor, feeding it like it's a newborn. Slow, cautious, reverent. A scrap of dry bark, a twist of rag soaked in old grease, one burned match, struck until your fingers went raw. You watch the flame flicker and dance, alive now, a weak but determined thing. And with it comes the familiar warmth, that sluggish, creeping comfort that starts in your palms and crawls up your arms like it's apologizing for being late. But don't relax too quickly. This fire, as precious as it is, might be trying to kill you. You see, the thing about heating your home in the 1700s when you're poor isn't just that it's hard, it's that it's dangerous. The very act of trying to stay warm can end with you coughing up black phlegm, choking on invisible poison, or waking up to find the roof has caught fire and everything's gone. Again, you've learned to watch for it. The thick, oily smoke that slinks up from damp wood, curling in the corners like it's ashamed to be here. Your chimney's probably cracked, or maybe there isn't one at all. Maybe your hearth is a hole in the ground with rocks piled around it and a pot balanced just so. The smoke doesn't go up. It hangs in the air, searching for lungs. And you breathe it in. Of course you do. What else are you going to do, not breathe? You cough. The baby coughs. Everyone coughs. It's the winter soundtrack. Not from illness, though that comes later, but from inhaling soot day after day. Black residue creeps up the walls, clings to the rafters, settles into your clothes. You try to crack a window, too cold, try to fan the air, too weak. So you just live with it. Some folks say it's not that bad. Better than freezing, they mutter, eyes watering. But it is that bad. You've seen neighbours pass out by the fire. You've heard stories of families who never woke up. No one talks about carbon monoxide yet. Science hasn't given it a name. But you know the symptoms, the headache, the drowsiness, that slow drift towards sleep that feels too easy. You've slapped someone awake before, yelled their name, thrown a cup of water in their face. You've been slapped in too. Chimneys, when they exist, aren't always the solution. The poor can't afford chimney sweeps, and so the soot builds up. Creosote, thick, sticky, flammable, lines the flue like a death trap. One spark and the fire goes up, not out. You've seen it happen. A neighbour's roof gone in 20 minutes. Screams, smoke, snow turning black as it drifts from the sky. And afterward? Nothing. Just ash. Charred timbers, a pile of frozen laundry under rubble, so you sweep your own chimney when you can, or send a child up with a brush tied to a rope. You wrap their face in cloth, kiss their forehead, and pray they come back down in one piece. It's terrifying, but it's cheaper than burying them. That's how winter thinks, cold and practical. If you've got a stove, you're one of the lucky few. Iron, squat, heavy, ugly, but it holds heat like a grudge. Still dangerous though. The Asian iron gets hot enough to blister your skin with a single touch. You learn to keep your distance. Teach the children not to run. One trip, one wobble, and you've got a third-degree burn and no medicine. Water, maybe. A cloth. That's it. Here's something most people don't realise. The poor burned anything. Wood, sure, if you could steal it or trade for it. But also coal dust, peat, straw, dried dung, rag soaked in fat, bones, seaweed, old shoes, trash, anything that produced a flame. The air wasn't just smoky. It was toxic. The smell of your fire depended on what you fed it. Sometimes it smelled like cooking, other times like rot. Burn a boot and you'll swear you're choking on melted sorrow. Quirky fact. In parts of coastal Europe, people actually burned dried fish oil and seaweed in clay pots. It stank to high heaven, but it kept the chill off. And in cities like London, where coal was plentiful but expensive, the poor burned coal balls, a mix of dust, clay, and other bits mashed into a lump and left to dry. They burned slowly, but filled your home with thick, sour smoke that blackened your walls and lungs at the same time. There's a debate among modern historians about how much these fumes contributed to long-term illness in the working poor. Was it the cold that killed them, or the cure? Hard to say. Pneumonia, bronchitis. Consumption. All part of the same ugly family tree, all rising up in winter, cutting down people like stalks of dying grain. And there's the noise of the fire, too. Soft pops, sudden crackles, the occasional angry hiss when something wet hits the flame. These sounds become part of your nightly life, markers of success. A popping fire means you have a fire. A quiet hearth, that's when you worry, when you lean in and realise the last ember's fading, when the darkness begins to win again. You learn to sit close but not too close. Lean in but stay alert. Warm your fingers, then your face, then your back, then your hands again. A slow rotation like you're turning on a spit. Everyone else does the same. You jostle for position, you squabble, but when the warmth hits, even for a moment, the silence spreads. No one speaks. You just listen to the fire's song and pretend it's enough. Sometimes you don't even burn for warmth. Sometimes it's just symbolic. A candle, a tiny flame, just something alive in the cold room to fight back the dark. It doesn't heat you, but it matters. It feels like defiance, a whisper that you're still here. And when you finally lie down, the room still smells like smoke. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your skin, and you cough once, twice. You tuck the blanket under your chin and feel the air thicken in your lungs. Your throat's dry, your nose stings. But you sleep anyway, because tonight you had fire. You burn just enough to breathe, and tomorrow you'll burn something else, whatever it takes. You don't have much, but you do have your voice. It's cracked and dry from smoke and cold air, but it works. And when the fire burns low and the wind rattles the walls like an angry ghost, sometimes the only thing that keeps your body moving and your heart from caving in is the sound of that voice rising into song. Not because you're happy. No one is really happy in the middle of a 1700s winter when your toes feel like glass, but because singing keeps you warm, literally. You start softly, almost shyly. A hum, a few words, maybe an old work song your grandmother used to sing while snapping beans in a warmer season you can barely remember. The melody wobbles. Your teeth chatter between verses, but someone across the room joins in, then another. Soon there's a chorus of rough voices, off-key, out of rhythm, but full of something that resembles life. You clap your hands too, not for applause, but for warmth. Clap, stomp, shuffle. Movement keeps the blood flowing. In households where the firewood is too precious to burn all night, this becomes the evening ritual. Sing, clap, stomp, repeat. The room fills with the sound of bodies refusing to go still. You bounce your heels on the floor, drum your hands against your thighs. You move because stopping means the cold wins. Sometimes it's lullabies for the kids. Sad, strange little songs with lyrics about snow and hunger, and mothers rocking babies in the dark. Songs that sound sweet until you listen closely and realize they're survival manuals wrapped in rhyme. Keep your toes tucked in, child, the frost will bite. Or, sleep now, baby, don't make a sound, the wolf is out and firewood's down. They don't sing these in rich nurseries. These are songs of people who've seen too many winters swallow too many names. Other times it's work songs, rhythmic, percussive, with beats that match the thud of logs being split or buckets being carried. You sing them even when you're not working, just to keep warm. Some households have traditions. One person starts a line, the next finishes it. It becomes a game, a ritual, a way to pass time when time feels heavy and cold and endless. And when things get really grim, the songs turn funny. Dark funny. Gallows humour in musical form. You make up verses about stew made from rats, or sleeping next to people who haven't bathed since October. One line gets a laugh and suddenly everyone's in on it. I had one sock, now I've got two. Found it frozen in the stew. Someone doubles over. Someone else adds a verse. Even the old woman in the corner who hasn't smiled in days chuckles under her breath. You'd be amazed how much body heat comes from laughter. It's not just homes either. In cities and towns, singing happens in taverns and alleyways, in workhouses and behind church walls. Poorhouses sometimes hold song nights just to keep spirits up and limbs moving. Not official events, just clusters of people humming together under blankets, too tired to talk, too cold to sleep, but still unwilling to give in. In prisons, yes, sometimes people would choose prison over freezing. Songs bounce off stone walls like echoes of rebellion. The guards don't always like it, but they let it happen. Even they know the cold creeps slower when music is in the air. There's a strange historical quirk that says something about the time. Some churches outright discourage singing outside of formal services, especially among the poor. It was considered unruly, too rowdy, too joyful, but people did it anyway, because in the dead of winter, singing isn't about joy, it's about resistance, it's about rhythm, it's about staying human when everything around you is frozen and silent. In some rural areas, entire villages would organise warming dances during the worst weeks of cold. No fancy music, just stomping, clapping and movement. You'd huddle in a barn or an empty hall, light one or two lanterns and move. Children spun in circles, elders rocked in time. No one cared what it looked like. You weren't doing it for fun. You were doing it to feel your toes. Singing and dancing weren't just distractions, they were strategies. Primitive cardiovascular routines wrapped in culture and tradition. Keep your body in motion and you stay ahead of the frostbite. Keep your spirit lifted and you last another day. That's the logic, even if no one says it out loud. Historians have debated the role of music in winter survival. Some call it psychological resistance, a way to keep morale up. Others see it as functional, even necessary. And then there are those who say it was just habit, something humans always did when things got bleak. But ask anyone who lived through a winter without enough firewood, and they'll tell you the truth. Singing kept us alive. Even without instruments, you found a way. Maybe a pot and a spoon became a drum. Maybe you strung a few chords on a bit of wood and made a one-string fiddle. Maybe someone had a penny whistle tucked away, dented and half frozen, but still willing to squeak out a tune. You made music with your hands, your feet, your teeth, if you had to. You weren't trying to impress. You were trying to survive, and sometimes, in the quiet after a song fades, there's this brief moment of peace, a calm that hangs in the room like steam from a hot cup. No one says anything. You just sit there, heart still thudding, bodies still warm from the movement. You made it another hour, that's something. You wrap your blanket tighter. Your hands are sore from clapping. Your voice is hoarse, but you feel less frozen, less forgotten, like maybe, just maybe, the cold hasn't won yet. Tomorrow the fire might not catch, the wind might break at a window. Someone might not wake up, but in tonight you sang, and the cold had to wait. You didn't plan on it, but there they are. Two bodies huddled together under the blanket, breathing in sync, tangled up like knots that somehow found their way into the same threadbare sheet. In any other season, in any other story, this might be romantic, but here, now, in the middle of a winter that's trying to kill you, it's just logistics. Warmth is warmth, flesh is insulation, morality is a summer problem. The first time it happens, it's awkward. You lie beside someone, not necessarily your spouse, not even someone you know well, because there's nowhere else to sleep. Maybe the fire's gone out. Maybe the roof leaks and this is the driest corner. Or maybe it's just too cold to be alone. You lie down facing away from each other. But at some point in the night your backs touch. Then your hips. Then the next thing you know, you're curled into each other like spoons in a drawer. Shared breath fogging between your faces. And then it happens again. Maybe not with the same person. Maybe not even with affection. It's not about love. It's not even about lust, not at first. It's about heat. Your body is a furnace. So is theirs. That's the math. Two bodies make more warmth than one. And three? Well, now we're talking proper insulation. This isn't scandalous. Not in the way rich people clutch their pearls about it. This is survival. You press skin to skin, hands to chest, thighs to thighs, because the alternative is frostbite or worse. You whisper, maybe. You joke. You lie there pretending you aren't trembling. Then sometimes it shifts. Touch becomes tension. Tension becomes friction. And friction, well, you know, sex happens in winter more than you'd think. Or maybe exactly as much as you'd think, given how close everyone is and how little space there is for modesty. And families sleep in the same room, sometimes the same bed. Walls are thin or non-existent. You don't need privacy, you need fire. And sometimes the only fire you've got is the kind your body can make on its own. People try to be quiet, not always successfully. You learn to tune it out. The rhythmic creak of the bed, the soft gasp, the brief rustle of blankets, and then silence again. Nothing scandalous, just life, just humans trying to feel alive while the world outside freezes solid. It's not always consensual, of course. Let's not romanticize it. Power doesn't go away just because it's cold. In overcrowded workhouses or shared tenements, someone always holds more food, more wood, more space, and sometimes they trade it for things no one should have to trade. A kiss, a touch, a night. You hear about it, you see it. You learn to look away because calling it out won't change anything, and you're barely surviving yourself. There are pregnancies naturally. It's one of the winter's cruelest jokes. You spend months trying not to die of cold, and then, surprise, you're growing a child inside your body, which now needs more warmth, more food, more care. The rich can afford midwives, nurses, herbs, beds with soft linens. You get your baby delivered on a floor with a damp cloth and a prayer. And then there's the shame. Not everyone feels it, but society is very good at handing it out. If you're unmarried and expecting, the whispers start fast. You're labelled, judged. Even if everyone knows how desperate things were, they still wag their tongues like you had a choice. Churches preach about chastity while their pews are half full of people who snuck under someone's blankets last week just to avoid freezing to death. Some try to hide it, fake illness, bind their bellies, move away when the bump gets too obvious. Others own it, too tired to care, too cold to play games. Yes, I'm pregnant, they say. Yes, it happened in winter. Yes, I'd do it again if it meant I got to sleep near the fire for a few weeks. There's also something tender, buried underneath the survival. Touch, when it's not forced, becomes a kind of protest, a way of saying, we're still here. Holding someone close, even just for a night, makes you feel human again. You whisper stories, share secrets. You rub frozen feet together until they tingle. You wake up and surprised to find you're still breathing and someone else is breathing next to you. You're not alone. Historically, birth rates rose in late summer and early autumn, which meant many conceptions happened during the coldest months. Scholars used to blame it on long nights and idle hands, but we know better now. The cold pushed people together, literally. When the only way to avoid death was body heat, intimacy was bound to follow. It wasn't always physical, sometimes it was just companionship. Two people sharing a blanket, trading stories, sharing stolen bits of food, singing each other to sleep. You latch onto that warmth like a lifeline. Winter strips away dignity, privacy, propriety, but it also makes you reach out. You stop pretending you don't need each other, and sometimes that honesty turns into something gentle, even beautiful. You don't ask if they'll still be there in spring, you don't make promises. Winter is too sharp for long-term thinking. You just lie close, listen to their heartbeat, and let your hands find each other in the dark. You breathe in time. You share the warmth. The cold can't get between you. Not tonight. And that, in a world where firewood is scarce and blankets are holes pretending to be fabric, is something close to magic. The church bell tolls once, low and distant, barely audible over the wind grinding its teeth through the alleyways. You count the chimes out of habit, though time means little these days. The cold makes all hours feel the same, grey and wool stitched together with numb fingers. But when the church bell rings, you look up, because even in this frozen world, the church means something. Whether it's sanctuary, obligation, or just a roof over your head, the church looms large in the winter life of the poor. Not always because it wants to help, but because it's there. Stone walls, thick doors, windows too high to let in the drafts. And inside, if you're lucky, heat, or at least less cold. But the relationship is complicated. You don't just walk into a church and warm your hands by the fire. That's not how it works. Most churches don't even have a fire, not for you. The clergy might keep a stove burning in their quarters, but out in the nave, you sit on hard wooden pews, huddled in your coat, breath rising in visible clouds during the sermon. The holy word might warm the soul, but it does nothing for your feet. Still you go, partly because you believe, or at least you used to, and partly because staying home feels worse. At least at church, you're not alone in your misery. There's a strange comfort in that. Rows of people packed together, like frostbitten sardines, all trying to find warmth in faith or each other, or just the repetition of words they've known since childhood. And the building is warmer than your own home, slightly. Those thick stone walls, so cold to the touch, do a surprisingly good job of holding in heat, especially when packed with bodies. On particularly brutal nights, the clergy sometimes opens the doors and lets people sleep inside. Not many, and not always, but sometimes. You've done it before, curled up beneath a pew with your coat wrapped around your head, shared a corner with a coughing stranger and listened to the draft whistle through the stained glass. You can't move much, can't stretch out, but you're not outside. That's the difference. Outside kills you. Inside just bruises your pride, but the rules are clear. No begging inside, no eating, no speaking out of turn. It's God's house, not a flop house. If you violate the sacred quiet, someone will shove you toward the door. Cold wind waiting like an executioner. So you follow the rules, you sit, you stand, you kneel, you shiver in silence. And you pray if only for another hour of not freezing to death. There are layers to the church's role in winter. On one hand, it provides charity, sometimes, a bowl of soup on Sunday, a sermon about mercy, an old coat from the donation pile. But on the other hand, it passes judgment. The sermons remind you that suffering is part of God's plan, that poverty is a test, that hardship makes you holy. It's hard not to roll your eyes when your teeth are chattering loud enough to drown out the gospel. The hypocrisy is thick, and you taste it like smoke. The priest's robes are lined with fur. His house is warm. He talks about sacrifice while sipping warm wine behind the altar. You try not to resent him. You fail, but you keep showing up because where else are you going to go? Some churches build charity stoves, massive metal contraptions fueled by public donations placed near the rear of the sanctuary. They don't warm the whole building, but people crowd around them before and after services, holding out hands like beggars in a bread line. You get a few minutes of heat before the deacon shoos you away. Still, it's something. Others have a warming stone, a tradition in older parishes. It's a flat slab heated by coals beneath, where children can sit during long winter sermons. You remember sitting there once when you were small. The heat seeped through your bones like a memory. Now, as an adult, you give that spot up to someone younger. It hurts, but you do it. That's how winter teaches you kindness, through tiny, painful sacrifices. And then, of course, there are the funerals. Churches fill with death in winter. Frost claims the old, the young, the sick, the unlucky. Every week, another box, another eulogy, another procession of grieving souls clomping through the snow in tooth-in boots. The graveyard out back turns into a field of white humps, some marked, most not. The ground is too frozen to dig deep, so sometimes the bodies wait, stored in crypts, in sheds, in the back of the vestry. The church bells toll more in winter. That's the irony. The cold quiets everything except death. Still, you're grateful for the sound. It means someone's watching the time. It means the church still stands. It means the door might open when things get truly desperate. A quirky truth, in some towns the church porch doubled as a warming shelter. Not inside the church itself, but the covered entryway. People would huddle there, wrapped in cloaks, pressed against the thick wood of the door, hoping for a few degrees difference. And sometimes, if the priest was merciful, or just exhausted, he'd leave the door unlatched. Historians love to argue about the church's role in poverty. Was it a force for good, a tool of control, a theatre of moral superiority? The answer, of course, is yes. All of it. It offered hope and handed out guilt in the same breath. It sheltered and shamed. It fed and starved. But when the wind screamed down your street like a banshee, and the snow climbed higher than your window, you didn't think about theology. You thought about that wooden door, whether it would be open, whether the pews would be full, whether the fire, if there was one, would still be burning. So tonight, and night, as the sky goes black and the frost begins to creep along the floorboards again, you put on your coat, you wrap the baby, you take your eldest by the hand and start walking. To the church, to stone walls and wooden pews and silence, to the only place left that might still hold warmth. You don't plan on stealing, not at first. You never wake up thinking, today I'm going to take something that isn't mine. But then your youngest starts coughing, that dry, rattling kind of cough that sounds like it's echoing in her chest. You check the fire. Cold, you check the woodpile empty, you look at her bundled in rags, eyes half closed, And that's when the decision makes itself. Because when it comes down to survival in a winter like this, morality doesn't stand a chance. Crime, in the brutal cold of the 1700s, isn't always about greed. It's about heat, about food, about one more night of life. Theft isn't a vice, it's a necessity. The poor steal because they've run out of legal options. You do it because you're freezing, hungry, and out of the ways to be respectable. Respect doesn't keep your children alive. A loaf of bread does. A bundle of wood. A coat left hanging too close to the alley. You start small, a scrap of coal from a passing cart, and a log fallen from a pile near the baker's shop. You grab it fast, don't look back, walk like you belong in your own skin. Your heart pounds so loudly you think someone will hear it, but no one does. Everyone's too busy guarding their own scraps to notice you snatching one. It gets easier. You figure out which stalls in the market leave their crates outside overnight. You learn that if you look sad enough, hungry enough, the guards will look away once, maybe twice. You learn how to hide things under your coat, how to move fast, how to act dumb if someone grabs your arm. Others go further, break into sheds, tear the doors off abandoned houses to burn for firewood, cut ropes, smash locks. There's an old woman who steals candle stubs from the church and sells them to people who melt them down and use the wax to waterproof shoes. You don't ask questions, you buy one. There's a man who picks the pockets of drunkards passed out in alleyways. A boy who lifts handkerchiefs and scarves and sells them back to the same merchants who lost them. A girl who robs coal cellars, sneaking into basements through windows small enough for her narrow frame. She trades lumps of coal for crusts of bread. She's missing 2 fingers, no one asks why. People steal food, and they get clever about it. Not just loaves and scraps, but ingredients. Flour, eggs, milk. You hear about someone who broke into a kitchen and cooked a stew in the middle of the night, then ran off with the pot. Imagine that. A crime of warmth and flavour. But of course, crime has consequences. Get caught and the law doesn't care why you did it. Doesn't care about your coughing daughter or your frostbitten feet. Doesn't care that your roof leaks or that your last honest job paid in soup and insults. The law cares that you broke it, that you took something that belonged to someone better. You've seen it happen. A boy flogged in the square for stealing a sack of coal, a girl shamed publicly for pocketing a pair of mittens, a man jailed for taking firewood from a forest he used to walk freely as a child. Justice isn't blind, it's cold, and cold justice breaks you just as fast as cold air. In cities, they toss you into the jail, filthy, overcrowded and barely warmer than the streets. In smaller towns, they punish you in public. Stocks, whipping posts, the pillory. You freeze while being punished for trying not to freeze. That's the logic of it. Still, people keep doing it because winter forces your hand. You weigh the risk against the cold creeping through your boots, and the cold always looks worse. And not all crimes are petty. You've heard the whispers. Someone burned down a landlord's house after he evicted a family in mid-January. Someone else cut the straps of a merchant's sled, letting his whole cargo tumble into the river. You know, a man, quiet, polite, always nods at the church door, who stabbed another man over a blanket. They called it murder. He called it keeping his child alive. There's something primal about winter. It strips the layers off people, shows you what they're really made of. The polite, rule-abiding cobbler becomes someone who lies to the baker to get an extra crust. The modest seamstress starts stealing cloth from the rag merchant's stall. The boy who used to run errands for the apothecary now runs scams, selling fake remedies made of ash and hope. Quirky historical fact. During some winters, local authorities would relax the enforcement of minor crimes. Not because they were merciful, but because they knew jailing too many poor people in the cold would just create more deaths and more problems to clean up. In London, it was said that if a man stole firewood but didn't run, the constable might just pretend not to see. A silent agreement. You steal what you need, I look the other way, and nobody dies today. But not all constables were kind. Some wanted to make examples. Public floggings became street theatre. This is what happens when you steal, they'd say, while the crowd muttered, this is what happens when you're poor. Still, you plan your next theft. You don't call it that, though. You call it gathering, or salvaging, or borrowing without asking. You see a coat drying on a clothesline and wonder if it would fit your son. You see an open door and wonder if there's a bundle of straw behind it. You see a bread cart with a torn sack and wonder if the driver would even notice one roll missing. And when you bring it home, whatever it is, you don't feel proud. You feel guilty, ashamed, relieved, alive. You hold the stolen bread in your hand like it might turn to ash. You break off a piece for each child. You don't eat until they've finished. Then you sit by the fire you lit with stolen wood and stare at the flames, wondering how long this will work, how long you can stay ahead of the cold, the law, and your own conscience. You don't want to be a thief, you want to be warm, and that's not the same thing. The animals are warmer than you most days. That's the bitter truth you think about as you press your back against the side of a cow and close your eyes for just a moment. Her massive body radiates heat like a living furnace, and you feel your own bones slacken with the first real warmth you've had in hours. She shifts her weight, grumbles a little, and you mumble an apology. But you don't move. You're not the only one doing this. Sleeping in stables wasn't just a last resort in the 1700s. It was a deliberate choice for many who had nowhere else to go. Livestock meant heat, even if it came with the stench of dung and the threat of being kicked in the ribs by a startled mule. Cows, sheep, pigs, they were survival partners during the long, brutal winters, and if you were clever or desperate enough, you could make their shelter your own. It's not glamorous. You lie in straw soaked with urine and melting snow, your boots off so you can press your frozen toes against the warm belly of a goat. You cover yourself with a burlap sack, trying not to breathe in the sour, wet scent of manure too deeply. You sleep sitting up, you wake up stiff and damp, but you wake up. In some households, animals shared the living space, not out of affection, but necessity. Poor families might bring the family pig indoors during the coldest months. The chickens, too, lined up along a shelf or tucked into the crates by the hearth. It sounds unsanitary, and it is, but it's warmer that way. Their bodies give off heat, and their clucking, snorting, lowing fills the silence that otherwise stretches long and deep through the cold nights. Some people built their homes with this in mind. One-room structures with the people on one side, animals on the other, separated by little more than a plank or a curtain. You wake up to the smell of hay and damp fur. You share the fire. You step over droppings in the dark. You listen to the steady chewing of a cow like it's a lullaby. It's not just about heat either. Animals are your wealth if you're lucky enough to own one. A cow means milk. A chicken means eggs. A sheep means wool and maybe someday meat. So when winter comes and your own body is already going half numb, you still make sure they are fed, watered and covered. You patch their shelter before your own. You share your food with them. Because if they get go, so do you. But not everyone owns livestock, so some steal it, or squat in stables that aren't theirs. You've done it once, crept into a barn under the cover of snow, heart pounding, unsure whether you'd get chased out or welcomed. You tucked yourself between bales of straw and a shivering sheep. In the morning the farmer found you. He didn't shout, just looked at you and said, "Feed the pigs before you go." You did, and left with your hands warmer than they'd been in days. There are stories, half rumour, half gospel, about people who froze to death a few feet from an animal's warmth because they were too proud or too ashamed to press it close. You never understand that. Pride doesn't keep your blood moving. You'd rather stink like a cow than die in a snowdrift with clean hands and frozen feet. A quirky lesser-known fact. In some mountain villages, they designed houses with heated animal floors. Livestock were kept in the basement or ground floor, and their heat rose through slats in the floorboards into the rooms above. Ingenious, smelly but ingenious. Some even ran narrow chimneys from the animal quarters into sleeping lofts to channel warmth upward. The poor didn't have technology, but they had desperation, and desperation is the mother of all invention. Of course, not everyone could build a house with livestock heating in mind, so most of you make do. A wool cloak stolen off a dead sheep, a blanket of straw and rags, a life spent crouched beside a body much larger than yours, begging for a little borrowed heat. And then there are the wild ones. Stray dogs, cats, even rats. You've seen old men sleeping in corners with 3 dogs wrapped around them like living scarves. You've watched a child curl up next to a half-wild alley cat who's too cold to run away. It's not love, it's a contract. You give me heat, I won't shove you off the blanket. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps the shivering down long enough to fall asleep. And then the morning comes. You rise before the animals do, careful not to startle them. Your legs are stiff, your back sore. There's straw in your hair and filth on your coat. You step out into the frostbitten air, breath smoking in the pale grey light. You smell like the barn. You are the barn, but your fingers work. Your toes wiggle. You're still here. You nod to the farmer if he's there. You toss an extra armful of hay into the pen. Maybe he saw you, maybe he didn't. But if he lets you come back tomorrow night, you won't ask why. You'll just show up and curl up beside the same cow, press your spine to her ribs, and fall into a sleep so deep it feels like floating. Some historians call this practice co-sheltering. Others call it desperation. But whatever name it's given, the truth stays the same. In winter, warmth doesn't care what shape it comes in. You survive with whatever heat you can find, even if it's four-legged, smelly, and occasionally bites. You give your thanks, you wipe your nose on your sleeve, you trudge back home, or whatever's left of it, with the scent of hay clinging to your skin and the memory of shared warmth still pulsing beneath your coat. And for once, you don't feel quite so human. But you do feel alive, and that's more than most can say. Your boots are soaked again. Not from snow exactly, it's the slush. That vile half-frozen soup that sneaks in around your ankles and makes every step feel like walking in a cold grave. You peel them off and pour out the water, watching the thin grey liquid steam as it hits the floor near the fire. Or what's left of the fire. A few embers and some hopeful kindling. You blow on it gently, like you're coaxing life back into a dying friend. It crackles barely. You can't afford to get sick, not now, not ever, but you will. Everyone does eventually. Winter doesn't just attack from the outside, it finds its way inside too. It gets into your lungs, your joints, your very blood. And there's no hospital waiting for you, no doctor pacing the halls, there's no antiseptic or heated bed or trained nurse with a warm cloth. No, there's a corner, a bucket, a blanket you share with someone who might already be worse off than you. Illness in the cold isn't just dangerous, it's expected. You start every winter knowing you'll be sick at least once, probably more. Coughs turn into fevers, fevers turn into chills, chills turn into someone wrapping a rag around your forehead and whispering, just breathe through it. You try, but you've seen how it ends. Sometimes it's a cold, just a cold, and snot aches shivering. You wrap yourself in every piece of clothing you own and sweat through it, teeth chattering until the fever breaks. But sometimes it's worse. The grip, they call it. The ague, the bloody flux, diseases that have names but no cure. You don't know the science, you just know when the cough sounds different, deeper, wetter, when the breathing becomes a struggle. When someone goes quiet and won't wake up. You've seen a child die that way. Yours, a neighbour's. At this point the memories blur. You remember the rattling breath, the too still chest, the way their skin went pale and waxy before anyone realised they'd slipped away. And then the silence, the way everyone avoids looking at the body, the quiet shuffle of someone grabbing the blanket off the bed, not for mourning, but because someone else will need it. Doctors are a distant dream. For the poor, they're like conjurers, rare, mysterious, and mostly useless unless you can pay, which you can't. So instead, you rely on remedies, passed down, whispered, mixed in dark kitchens and hopeful corners. You make teas from whatever you can find. Pine needles, dried rose hips, onion water. You boil bark and steep roots. You chew garlic raw if you're lucky enough to find some. You put mustard on the chest, wrap it in cloth, and pray the sting drives out the sickness. Some smear lard mixed with herbs on the soles of their feet. Others hang onions near the bed to absorb bad air. You've done both, and when that fails, you turn to superstition. You tie charms to the bedpost. Hang iron scissors above the door. Burn herbs not because they'll cure anything, but because the smell makes you feel like you're doing something. Quirky fact. In some villages, people believed a red ribbon tied around the neck could prevent winter fever. Others swore by either sleeping with a potato in your pocket or placing a dead mouse in your shoe. Seriously, as a form of folk protection. Desperate ideas, sure, but desperation doesn't ask for logic. You've also heard of bloodletting. A man in the next street lets himself be cut every few months, swearing it draws the poison out. You've never dared. It seems too dangerous. Like helping winter do its job. But the man still walks, and you're not so sure anymore. When someone gets really sick, you isolate them, not with medical precision, just out of instinct. You tuck them in a corner, wrap them tight, place a rag over their mouth if they're coughing too much. You make broth if you can, onion peel and water, maybe a bone if you've still got one left. You spoon it into cracked lips and hope it helps. And still the smell of sickness lingers, heavy, sour, like sweat and fear, and something deeper. Something final. You recognise it instantly, even in the dark, especially in the dark. It hangs in the room like a shadow you can't sweep away. You learn not to fear death so much as anticipate it. When someone stops shivering, that's the worst sign. You know that sounds backward, but it's true. The body only shivers when it's still fighting. When it goes still, when the breath becomes quiet, when the lips go slack, that's when you start saying goodbye. Sometimes the dead stay in the house overnight. The ground's too frozen for burial. You wrap them in cloth, say a prayer, move them away from the warmth, if there is any left. And then you wait. For a priest, for a gravedigger, for spring. Meanwhile, the others still need care. You can't stop. There's always someone else coughing, someone else sweating through the night, someone else asking, "Do we have anything left for tea?" You lie. You say yes. You boil water, throw in whatever plant looks least poisonous, and tell them it's medicine. Because sometimes belief is stronger than cure, and when it's you who gets sick, it's a different game. You fight harder. You hate the weakness. You try to work through it, but your hands tremble and your vision swims. You don't want to lie down. Lying down feels like giving up, but eventually your body forces the choice. You crawl under the same blankets you patched last week. You press a cloth to your forehead and listen to your own breath like it's trying to escape you. You beg the fire to hold on. You beg your body not to quit. You promise to steal more coal tomorrow, to boil cleaner water, to eat more somehow. And when you wake up, if you wake up, you count it as a win. Another round survived. Another night stolen from the cold's greedy hands. Winter sickness doesn't care who you are. It comes for everyone, but not everyone gets to leave. You keep your back to the wind, chin tucked down into your collar, arms folded tight across your chest. The snow's picked up again, not the soft, lazy kind that looks pretty from behind a window, but the hard, needling kind that cuts sideways across the sky, bites your skin through 4 layers of cloth, and makes your eyelids stick together when you blink too slow. You're not outside because you want to be. You're out because you have to be. You're foraging, not for mushrooms or herbs or berries. Those are luxuries for other seasons. Now you're foraging for anything. Fuel mostly, bits of wood, old rope, maybe some scraps from a ruined building that you can dry over the fire. You scan the streets like a crow looking for shiny things. Only your version of shiny is a broken chair leg or a discarded barrel lid. You don't walk exactly, you trudge. Every step a negotiation with the cold. Back behind the bakery you find a pile of old crates half covered in snow. The wood's warped and rotting, but you can't afford to be picky. You pry one apart with your hands, snapping slats into fire-sized chunks. Your fingers go numb halfway through. You keep going. Someone else appears. A boy. 12, maybe. Thin as a broom handle and watching you like a stray dog. You make eye contact, then gesture toward the pile. There's no ownership here. He nods once and starts pulling apart a crate of his own. You work side by side, silent but not unfriendly. In winter, that's as close to a partnership as most people get. Back home, or whatever counts as home, this haul will last half a day if you're lucky. You'll ration it carefully, 1 log at a time, maybe with some peat or paper to stretch the burn, and then you'll be back out tomorrow, looking again. Fuel isn't the only thing you scavenge. You check the ground near the alley walls for half-buried trash. A broken boot sole? That could patch a leak in the roof. A length of frayed rope? Tie it into a curtain to block the draft. An old petticoat frozen stiff? That's tomorrow's blanket, thank you very much. Sometimes you go to the midden heaps, the trash piles behind houses. You wait until no one's looking, then dig through the frozen waste with a stick or your bare hands. Gloves get too wet. You find bones sometimes, boil them for broth. Twice if you have to. You find cloth chewed by rats, still useful. One time you found a cracked ceramic pot and you nearly cried. Patched the crack with pitch and used it to carry melted snow. You try not to take from the truly poor, you know who they are. You see the same faces every day wandering the same routes. There's an unspoken rule, don't steal what someone else is already surviving off of. But when it's a choice between your family and theirs, well, you've made harder choices. On the very worst days, you go to the market just to look, not to buy. Buying's not on the menu. But you watch, see what gets discarded, what freezes too fast to sell, what falls through the cracks. You follow the butchers, the bakers, the fishmongers. You time your walks to their clean-up hours, hoping something edible gets tossed out just a little too early. Quirky fact, some cities developed informal scavenger zones, places where the poorest were unofficially allowed to pick over the day's leavings. Merchants turned a blind eye, not out of kindness but fatigue. You've been to one. It's like a theatre of the desperate. People picking ribs clean with frozen hands, women fighting over cabbage leaves, children scraping at frozen meat with the edge of a spoon. You used to be ashamed of it. Now it's routine. There's a difference between scavenging and begging. Begging is active. You speak, you ask. You risk being seen. Scavenging? That's quieter. You find, you take, you don't make eye contact. There's a strange pride in it. You didn't ask for a handout. You found your own way. Even if it means boiling a piece of shoe leather, because someone told you once it releases nutrients. You don't know what nutrients are, but it helps the hunger pass. And yes, people eat things they shouldn't. Mouldy bread, rotten fruit. You've cut the green off cheese more than once and called it good enough. You've eaten porridge with bugs in it because picking them out took too long. When you're cold and starving, your standards aren't just lower, they don't exist. One winter you watched a man gnawing on a book. Not metaphorically, he was actually chewing the pages. Some kind of desperate experiment in sustenance. He boiled the cover in water, claimed the glue had calories. You believed him. You didn't try it yourself, but only because you didn't have a book. You also look up, not just down. People dump things from windows. Slop buckets, rotten stew. You've been hit before, hot liquid that scalded your neck, or a frozen hunk of refuse that left a bruise. But you also once caught a roll of crusty bread mid-air. That felt like a miracle. There's a debate among scholars, real ones, the kind who wear warm clothes indoors, about how much scavenging sustained the poor during brutal winters. Some say it was marginal, a supplement. Others argue it was essential. But you don't need a study. You know, it's not a question of helpful, and it's a question of, did you find enough to burn, eat, or wear today? If the answer's yes, you survive. If it's no, you try it again tomorrow. That's the rhythm. That's the grind. That's winter. When you finally get home with your haul, you pile it next to the fire. You're proud, quietly, you don't show it. But there's a satisfaction in the clink of gathered wood, in the sight of your children's eyes lighting up as you toss on the first log. You don't tell them where it came from, you just smile and say, "We'll be warm tonight." And for a few hours, you are. You sit by the fire and feel like you won. Tomorrow the snow will fall again. Tomorrow the boots will soak again. But for now, you dry your feet and you rest. You scavenged enough. And that's everything. Morning comes in pieces, not with sunlight, because the sky's still the same dull grey it's been for weeks, but with sound. The creak of someone shifting beside you, the low groan of a floorboard settling, the whistle of wind squeezing through the gaps in the wall, testing your resolve like it always does. You blink awake beneath a scratchy blanket and don't move. You wait, eyes open, staring at the ceiling while your body takes inventory. Fingers, aching but working. Toes, unclear, chest, tight, head, heavy, but alive, and that's all you need to start. You sit up slow, careful not to shake the heat out of your blanket too quickly. The baby's still asleep, curled like a question mark near the hearth, which has burned down to a mess of charcoal and hope. You pull your coat around you like armour, knot it shut at the waist, and stand. The cold hits immediately. Not like a slap. Note that would be too dramatic. It's more like a quiet betrayal, your own house turning against you again. Today is like every other winter day. Survive. You've survived so many of them now that it feels like the new normal. No one talks about spring anymore. You used to whisper about it, like a secret. When the thaw comes... But now even that feels like tempting fate. Spring is a rumour, cold is fact. You start with the fire. Always get it going before the others wake. You take the kindling you stashed last night, precious scraps gathered from alleyways and forgotten corners, and stack them with practiced care. One spark, that's all you need. One match, one flint strike, one puff of breath warm enough to coax it to life. It catches. You smile. It's small, but it's a win. You've learned to count your victories in inches, not miles. While the fire builds, you prep the morning's meal, or what passes for it. Last night's crust, softened in hot water, with a pinch of salt if you've got any left. Maybe a shred of onion. You stir it with a stick you've shaved clean and call it soup. No one complains. Hunger makes everything taste like love. One by one they wake. Your children, your neighbour's child who's been sleeping on the floor for 3 nights now. The old woman who barely speaks but always hums when the fire crackles. You greet them like soldiers returning from battle. Still here, another night conquered, another inch forward. You pass out the bowls, steaming and thin. The baby eats with both hands, the others slurp, not because it's good, but because it's something. The warmth travels from their bellies to their cheeks, pinking the skin, bringing colour back to faces you thought had forgotten it. And then the day begins. Not with joy, not with rest, but with motion, because if you stop moving, you start freezing. Everyone has a job, someone fetches more wood, someone melts snow, and someone goes begging, carefully, strategically near the richer quarter, where the maids sometimes drop coins without looking. Someone tends to the sick or the dying, or the sick who are probably dying, but no one wants to say it yet. You notice your hands are cracking again. The skin split at the knuckles, raw and red. You wrap them in cloth and ignore the sting. There's no time for pain. You patch the window with a new rag. You tuck straw into the holes in the floor. You check on the neighbours. You offer them some of your soup water. They offer you silence in return, which is fine. Some days silence is the only kindness left. Midday brings no sun, just a slight shift in the wind's pitch, a brightness in the snow that feels almost optimistic. You step outside and squint up. It's not warmer exactly, but it's not colder either. And that's enough to keep going. People pass you in the street, hunched figures, layers on layers of coats and blankets. Everyone looks like walking bundles of fabric and fatigue. You nod at each other, barely. There's a shared understanding. You're not strangers anymore, just survivors in the same miserable symphony. Someone shouts. A sled overturned. You rush over with others, help gather the scattered goods, coal, precious coal, and you don't pocket any of it. That's how tight things have become. You help because you have to believe someone would help you if it were your turn. Quirky detail? Some communities organised informal cold patrols, groups who walk through alleyways at night checking for people who had collapsed. They'd drag them to shelter, or cover them with rags, or whisper prayers over the bodies already stiff. There's no badge, no uniform, just people who couldn't bear to let winter win again. By evening, the fire is going strong, a small miracle. The pot still has water. You found a carrot. The baby laughed. Someone brought back a torn glove, little things, enough to stitch together a sense of purpose. You sit in your chair, if it can still be called that, and watch the flames flicker against the wall. The light dances in the frost patterns on the glass. The room glows in soft orange and shadow. You feel the weight of your exhaustion pulling you down like a tide, but you don't sleep yet. You listen to the sound of breathing, to the crackle of fire, to the absence of a wind through the walls, and you realise, against all odds, that this is peace, not comfort, not joy, just the quiet space between panic and grief, the place where you can finally exhale. Some historians say the poor in the 1700s simply endured winter, like it was something passive, but you know better. You fought every day, every breath, every step through slush and smoke and songs. You didn't endure winter, you survived it, and you'll survive tomorrow too, because the fire's still burning, and so are you. So here you are, breathing in the last of the smoke-sweet air, staring into a fire that's burned all the way down to gentle embers. You've made it through, not just this night, but the long cold journey we took together, through frost-bitten alleys, bush-soaked boots, and fire-starved homes. 30 nights of cold, 30 chapters of survival. And you're still here. Heart still thudding, skin still warm, even if it's only from the imagination we conjured together. Let's be honest, it wasn't easy. The way the cold inched in under every door, crept into the cracks of your hands, wrapped itself around your ribs like a thief. The poor in the 1700s weren't surviving winter with hot cocoa and thermal socks. No, they did it with wet rags, stolen coals, shared body heat, and a terrifying familiarity with death. Their lives were fragile, improvised, and somehow beautifully stubborn. And yeah, some of it made you wince. The mice, the soup made from bone water and desperation, the sleeping beside strangers and livestock, the fear that one missed fire would be your last. But then there were the small victories too, weren't there? The kindling that lit, the neighbour who shared half a crust, the baby's laugh, the broken teacup someone still tried to warm their fingers with. All of it, every cough, every flicker of warmth, every impossible choice told you one thing: people will do anything to keep going. Even when the snow piles high, even when the breath fogs on the air like a ghost, even when hope seems like a summer memory. Now, as the fire goes soft and the frost hums outside your imagined window, let your eyes close just a little. Let the weight of those stories settle over you like a thick wool blanket, threadbare but honest. You're not in a tenement. You're not in a stable. You're safe. You're warm. But you carry something now, a quiet understanding, a flicker of empathy. And maybe, just maybe, the cold feels a little less cold because of it.